Black patriarch.
Most American people, especially people of my ethnicity, they don't understand that people create jobs, not government. That people create jobs, not government. That people create jobs, not government. They think, if I go out to get a job, prime example, they have 1,000 jobs at Walgreens offering. You got 500,000 people standing in line. They don't understand, a lot of Americans, including people of my ethnicity, they don't understand that people, since the pop and the mom shops, create jobs.
Productivity is an economic term describing the relationship between outputs as compared to inputs needed to produce those outputs. It's a measure of efficiency. Typical inputs are raw materials, labor, and capital assets. Outputs are generally expressed as either revenue or total units of finished goods. Productivity is measured at every level of the economy, from the total economy as a whole all the way down to the individual level. For the economy as a whole, productivity is calculated by dividing the economy's gross domestic product by the total labor hours it took to produce that GDP.
The country's GDP. This stands for Gross Domestic Product. GDP is a common measure that's used to roughly represent the size of a country's economy. The way you calculate GDP is both simple as a general principle and complicated in the details. The simple version is that GDP is the value of all the goods and services produced within a country in a given period of time, such as a financial quarter or a year. Every item, product, or service brought to market by workers or other economic resources located inside the country in that year is part of the GDP. A country with a large growing GDP might look strong on paper, but what if that number is masking a vast income inequality, a productive economy based on huge amounts of low-wage labor? A simple example would be comparing GDP with population to come up with per capita GDP, which means economic value per person. So, according to the World Bank, in 2013, China's GDP was a massive $9.2 trillion. Compare that to Luxembourg's relatively small GDP of $60 billion. Yet, in that same year, China's GDP per capita was only about $6,800, while Luxembourg's was more than 16 times that at about $110,000. So while China's economy is certainly much larger, it looks like each individual citizen on average is better off in Luxembourg. Financially speaking, that is.
we haven't really talked about why some countries have a high GDP and others have a low GDP. So why are some countries rich and others poor?
The main reason some countries are rich is because of their productivity, their ability to produce more output per worker per hour. U.S. workers altogether earn 18 times more per hour than Bangladeshi workers because they're able to produce 18 times more output per hour. U.S. workers today earn 8 times more per hour than U.S. workers 100 years ago because they produce 8 times more output per hour. But not only is the U.S. producing more stuff, it's also producing higher value products.
Limitations aside, low productivity remains a fundamental reason why some countries are poor. Higher productivity not only helps explain why we have more money to buy stuff, but also why we have more stuff to buy. So if you want a single one-word answer as to why some countries are more successful than others, here it is: productivity. So if you look at the big picture,
And by big picture, we mean both globally and historically.
increasing productivity has resulted in increased standards of living for much of humanity over the last 100 years.
In the last few years, Texas has become one of the most important drivers of the entire US economy. So you might be asking now, what exactly is so special about Texas?
Universities.
Texas has been able to develop one of the best university systems in the world. Even though it only has a population of 27 million people, 4 of the world's top 100 universities are located in the state. For some perspective on that, a country like Spain, which has a far larger population, has no universities in the top 100. The education system in Texas not only creates high-quality professionals, but also attracts investment from a lot of companies.
UMass Lowell cultivates startup companies, conducts groundbreaking research, and trains highly skilled workers. This is the fuel needed to power the Massachusetts economy.
The Commonwealth needs a pretty interesting, diversified workforce in order to stay at the forefront of the nation's economy and the world's economy. UMass Lowell actually plays a really interesting role in depicting who these students are. You need problem solvers, makers, and thinkers all in the same person.
To build the workforce the Commonwealth needs, UMass Lowell has formed stronger partnerships with companies to expand co-op and internship programs.
In Qatar, in 1939, in a little place called Dukhan, geologists have just discovered oil. And now, everything will change forever. Then in 1971, history is made. Here under the sea, we discover the treasure of all treasures, the North Field. As you see, the discovery of gas literally transformed our country overnight. Today, Qatar's exploration and production of oil and natural gas makes us one of the most important energy suppliers in the world.
Mauritius is now more than just paradise for holidaymakers. It's an economic success story. The government provides free education right up until tertiary level and free health services for all. A must, it seems, for any developing country that's determined to improve its lot. Critics warn, though, that it is becoming something of a tax haven, a suggestion fiercely denied by authorities.
Few, if any, African countries can claim middle income status. They can claim to have free education through to university, free healthcare without any exploitable mineral wealth. Mauritius has no natural resources, geographically an isolated island, and yet here it is managing to grow, managing to provide basic public goods to all the population. Just give us a sense of how Mauritius did it.
Well, it's never been a miracle. It's hard work. It's pragmatic approach to development.
Yeah.
We have never been ideological about development. We've been very pragmatic. And maybe precisely because we have nothing, except the most important resource, people, that we went the way we went.
TC has leveraged Botswana's favorable business environment and many investors to the country. Trenuj Botswana, a global diamond jewelry company, is one such investor who is attracted to Botswana by BITC, who are able to ensure an enabling
There are basically three factors that determine whether a country will be rich or poor. The first is institutions. Institutions are beyond important. Broadly speaking, rich countries have good institutions and poor ones have very, very bad ones. The correlation between poverty and corruption is direct. The richest countries in the world are quite simply invariably also the least corrupt ones. And the most corrupt countries are also the poorest. Without an adequate tax base, poor countries can't invest in police, education, health and transport.
Capitalism means learning how to own and control the land, the business and the resources and use other people's labor to enrich yourself and your community. That's capitalism. You want me to repeat that for you again? I want to make sure your listeners understand what it is. Capitalism means learning how to own and control the land, resources, and businesses, and use other people's labor to enrich yourself. That's why slavery worked so effectively. That's capitalism. That's in the 1500s.
So capitalism is an economic system, but it's also a cultural system. It's characterized by innovation and investment to increase wealth. So let's say it's 1200 CE and you're a rug merchant. Just like merchants today, you sometimes need to borrow money in order to buy the rugs you want to resell at a profit, and then you pay that money back, often with interest, once you've resold the rugs. This is called mercantile capitalism, and it was a global phenomenon, from the Chinese to the Indian Ocean Trade Network to Muslim merchants who would sponsor trade caravans across the Sahara. That kind of investment definitely increased wealth, but it only affected a sliver of the population, and it didn't create a culture of capitalism. Another factor was a remarkable increase in agricultural productivity in the 16th century. As food prices started to rise, it became profitable for farmers, both large and small, to invest in agricultural technologies that would improve crop yields. This increased productivity eventually brought down prices, and this encouraged further innovation in order to increase yield to make up for the drop in prices. Lower food prices had an added benefit. Since food cost less and wages in England remained high, workers would have more disposable income, which meant that if there were consumer goods available, they would be consumed, which incentivized people to make consumer goods more efficiently and therefore more cheaply.
(1670), Delft, Dutch Republic. The newly independent Dutch Republic is the world's first explicitly capitalist nation, where lazy aristocrats are looked down upon and hard-working merchants revered. In the churches, Protestant sermons about thrift and hard work are heard.
Mercantilism is an economic system that was used by European countries in the 15 to 1700s. Under mercantilism, a country's wealth was determined by its accumulation of gold and silver. So just about everything the government did was to make sure it gained more gold and more silver. In order to get this gold and silver, a country needed a favorable balance of trade. This means that the country exports more than it imports. Picture the country as a business. In order for business to succeed, it has to sell more than it buys so that it makes a profit. This is the same way countries acted as well. They would trade goods with other countries, hoping to export more than they imported. If they did, the other country would need to make up the difference in gold and silver. Colonies played a huge role in European countries increasing their wealth. A mother country would set up colonies in other parts of the world. Then, they would take the raw materials of that colony and use their industrial capabilities to turn them into manufactured goods. As these colonies became populated, they became new markets for the mother country to sell to.
In the 17th and 18th centuries, there was an intensive global imperial rivalry. Colonies in the mercantilist era were seen as a way of enriching the home country. Colonies would sell raw materials to the home country, where they would be manufactured and then sold back to the colonies as finished goods. Colonists were banned for competing with manufacturers in the home country. In the New World, this took the shape of the Spanish in Latin America mining gold and silver, the British in North America planting tobacco and other staple commodities, the French in Canada trapping furs and fishing, and then the British and the French together in the Caribbean, known as the West Indies, planting and harvesting sugar.
Here's another system of trade that you need to understand as part of this process of mercantilism, and it's known as triangular trade. Okay, and what we'll see is that Europeans transported manufactured goods to the west coast of Africa. Okay, and then what they do is the traders exchange these goods for captured Africans who were then sold in the Americas. So they would trade the goods for captured Africans who were then turned into slaves, and those slaves and gold, if they paid gold for those manufactured goods, would then be shipped to either South America, the Caribbean region, or even into North America itself. And then the merchants that bought that sugar, coffee, and tobacco in the West Indies would then sail back to Europe to sell these products.
And the European colonial powers were saying, I sent you whites to America to build America, to use the land, to bring resources, to find gold and silver and products back to Europe. They came here specifically to get wealth and resources and gold. And what they kept telling the European colonial powers was that we can't do anything with America because we don't have a labor force. Just to show you what they were doing, just from 1500 to 1660 as an example,
They shipped 5 million black folk out of Africa just to Central America down here to dig for gold and silver. Black folk at that point in time were producing almost 99% of all the sugar on earth, cotton, tobacco, anything else. They were building all the houses. They were the caulkers, builders. So what they did then, they started advertising in Europe. So anybody wants to get wealth, they go to America. You go to America, we guarantee you. We give you free land and free labor. And you would have to be an idiot to come to America if we give you free land and free labor and not get rich. Black people in the South, on the eve of Civil War, picked and sold alone over 1 billion pounds of cotton and was sold just to England alone. England paid 48 cents a pound for that cotton. That cotton, that money from that cotton, gave every white person in the United States $500 without even working on the eve of the Civil War. So what I'm telling you is that they didn't get their wealth from working hard.
(1776), 141 The Strand, London. These are the offices and shop of Strain and Cadell, publishers who have a big success with a new book, An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations, written by a Scottish philosopher called Adam Smith. Smith demystifies wealth creation by explaining how capitalist economies grow. He reaches several important conclusions. Slavery is remarkably inefficient. Violence is less of an incentive than money for a worker, and the cost of buying and maintaining slaves far exceeds the cost of wages. Capitalists will make far more money by treating their workers legally and humanely. Cities were exploding in size, vast companies were forming, a new managerial elite was replacing the old aristocracy. Capitalism began as a result of developments in technology, especially steam power.
Capitalism is also a cultural system rooted in the need of private investors to turn a profit. So the real change needed here was a change of mind. People had to develop the capitalist values of taking risks and appreciating innovation. Industrial capitalism developed first in Britain in the 19th century. Britain had a bunch of advantages. It was the dominant power on the seas, and it was making good money off of trade with its colonies, including the slave trade. Also, the most important idea that was popularized in England was that men and women were consumers as well as producers, and that this was actually a good thing because the desire to consume manufactured goods could spur economic growth. So this increased productivity also meant that fewer people needed to work in agriculture in order to feed the population. To put this in perspective, in 1520, 80% of the English population worked the land. By 1800, only 36% of adult male laborers were working in agriculture, and by 1850, that percentage had dropped to 25. This meant that when the factories started humming, there were plenty of workers to hum along with them.
1854, London. The British economy is now the largest in the world, thanks to its enormous industries of cotton, shipbuilding, steel and coal. Vast cities have chewed up the countryside of the Midlands and northern England. Merchants and the newly rich capitalist class have triumphed.
Over the course of the century, you had a couple of things happen. You had, first, education open up dramatically, so that you had larger and larger portions going to college. But not only that, you had a new kind of stratification of how kids went to college. So that Harvard, which used to be a school which had a lot of rich kids and a fair number of smart ones, became a school where you had a lot of smart kids and a fair number of rich ones. And the same thing was going on throughout the educational system.
Imagine being kidnapped or sold into captivity, forced into submission through violent beatings, torture, and intimidation, sold on the auction block to the highest bidder, and being forced to work for free under the most cruel, deplorable conditions. And it's all perfectly legal. This was the existence for blacks enduring the horrific institution of enslavement in our nation's early years.
When indentured servitude was changed into the permanent state of slavery, permanent state of the institution of slavery, the Virginia colonists passed a series of laws that are called the slave codes. And these slave codes are codified into law to restrict and prohibit enslaved people from having access to government, from having access to private enterprise, as well as prohibiting enslaved people from having relationship between wife to husband, husband to children, and subsequently the ownership of property.
With the end of the Civil War in 1865 and the ratification of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, slavery was abolished and African Americans were given the right to vote. Despite the progress, newly freed blacks faced an array of daunting social obstacles. To deal with these issues, the Union began an era known as Reconstruction.
Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation had freed slaves across the South. But Washington still had no clear plan for what to do once African Americans were free. On January 11th, President Lincoln sent his Secretary of War, Edwin M. Stanton, to Savannah. Stanton instructed General Sherman to set up a meeting with some of the city's black ministers. He wanted to hear how the freedmen imagined their future in the South.
To be a slave, as one of these ministers pointed out to General Sherman, was to be someone who had no control over his life's decisions. And now, these people feel the need to express their abilities, their choices.
The way we can best take care of ourselves is to have land. And we can soon maintain ourselves and have something to spare. We want to be placed on land until we are able to buy it and make it our own.
Entrepreneurship is the best game in the world if you understand the system that we live under, the structure. If you understand the framework of the country that you live in. For example, I live in the United States. The framework that our system was built upon is called capitalism. Now, schools don't teach this. They don't teach capitalism. You know why? Because schools, they train employees to go work for corporations, and they're funded by corporations and the government. So those employees can be exploited at some point. So the government wants you to be rich. They want you to become successful, and the rules are made to benefit the entrepreneur. And if you understand the tip I just gave you, you will become an entrepreneur.
One in a Million, the history of Madam C.J. Walker and her entrepreneurial legacy. Not even her poor and difficult beginnings stymied Madam Walker's road to greatness. The woman who would become known as the first self-made female millionaire and the greatest benefactress of her race was born the daughter of Owen and Minerva Breedlove, poor ex-slaves living on a cotton farm in Louisiana.
Madam C.J. Walker, who was the first woman millionaire, who just happened to be a black woman, and she made her first million in the 1890s. As I said, people like Madam Walker, who while she made in their photos of an incredible wedding that she gave to her granddaughter in 1923 for $60,000. A $60,000 wedding in 1923 is, I mean, it's astronomical in today's dollars. It certainly was incredible in 1923 dollars. But what's also important about her story is that she was a woman of great wealth who had founded a company that that manufactured hair care products and started a chain of beauty schools. But she also, with this great wealth, was also contributing to the NAACP. She gave thousands and thousands of dollars at the turn of the century to the NAACP to aid them in their anti-lynching campaign.
Blacks were voting. You know, sometimes it seems when we talk about, oh, you know, blacks didn't get the vote, at least, you know, down in the South, until the, you know, 1960s or beyond. Well, the right to vote is embedded in the Constitution, and blacks were coming out to vote in droves. That's how these African Americans got elected to Congress. But, you know, the whites ran scared. And in this contested election, the Democrat, and remember, African Americans are voting Republican. We've had a switcheroo there. This was the party of Lincoln. These were the radical Republicans in Congress who had passed all these measures and forced them through. So it seemed like they, and the federal government in general, was the black man's protector. But no more. So what happened is the Democratic candidate offered up some contested electoral votes in return for the Republican candidate to agree that, yes, he would become president, but one of the first things he would do is to order the remaining federal troops in the South, keeping Reconstruction commitments, to go. That there would be no interference in the South. Now, you know, I don't deny that this was a very tall order. And no matter who was president, even the great Lincoln, what had to be done at some point was to both let the South up easy and...
The Republican Party was founded on liberal social principles. The party fought diligently for the abolition of slavery. It fought diligently for equality, civil rights, public accommodations, things of that nature during the Civil War era, the Reconstruction era. Many of you are familiar with that. And so the question for many is, how is it that a party that begins with near unanimous support in the black community end up in a circumstance in which there is now near unanimous opposition? And I think you can't talk about that until you talk about the battle that was going on within the Republican Party for control of the apparatus of the party. Many of you all have heard of radical Republicans, those northeastern liberals who pushed very strongly for the abolition of slavery and other things that were advantageous to black interests. And this is where I think things get a little tricky. The Republicans will have you to believe that that is what the entire party was about. That's not true. There were factions within the party that resisted these efforts, and they resisted them in part for political reasons. That is to say, the Democrats controlled the South. The Democrats did a good job of demonizing the Republican Party as the party for blacks. And the Republicans some Republicans began to feel the need to sort of respond to that.
During Reconstruction, former slaves were given the right to vote, and as a result, the nation's first black senators were elected.
In the period of 1867 to 1871, this is a period right after the Civil War, and before D.C. became a territory, before Congress instituted territorial government in D.C. You have some drastic changes in the city, and it all starts with African Americans petitioning for the right to vote, for universal suffrage.
By 1871, blacks in the district had made many strides in the quest for equality, but with mounting pressure from whites in the city, Congress and the president instituted the territorial form of government in order to gain control over black political and social mobility. But the advances would not continue. With the controversial election of 1876 and the Jim Crow laws that followed, much of the historic gains during Reconstruction would evaporate.
In 1883, the Supreme Court made a fateful decision. They voted to nullify the Civil Rights Act of 1875. That meant that from now on, there could once again be whites-only hotels, restaurants, barbershops, and theaters. Black leader Henry McNeil Turner knew he had been betrayed by the nation's highest court.
Opportunity for black businesses is the driving force behind the 7 decades of the Houston Citizens Chamber's existence.
We were founded in 1935, and C.F. Richardson was a publisher, L.H. Spivey was a printer, H.P. Carter was a community activist out in the Fifth Ward area.
Those names belong to the men who got together back in 1935 to create an organization very similar to the all-white Houston Chamber of Commerce. This was a Houston in the grip of the Depression and where segregation was a way of life.
Where the downtown is today was a growing business community of African Americans, but yet they had to do it amongst trials, tribulations, and tumultuous times.
We couldn't go into certain stores. So we had to have our own grocery stores. They didn't want to do our cleaning of our clothes, so we had to have our own cleaners there. They didn't want us eating in their food establishments, so we had to have our own food cafes, restaurants there to supply us with cooked food there. In any area that you can think of that you need for your livelihood, we had to operate a business to support us because no one wanted to take any of our business at that time. You had to deal with each other.
So the Houston Negro Chamber of Commerce was born in the Pilgrim Building on West Dallas near Bagby, the heart of black commerce in the Fourth Ward.
Mr. J.E. Robinson was the first president.
The founders realized organizing was the key to not just black economic growth, but daily survival. In those early days, the vision was large, but the knowledge limited. The Negro Chamber extended its services to every black neighborhood in the city in an effort to help people realize their own economic strengths, despite the challenges of segregation.
We were able to create some excitement, because just the idea of the talk in the community about our getting together. And getting together is not easy.
Back to those early days, my own early days in high school, junior high school, there was no division really between lower class blacks and middle class blacks. Lower class blacks looked up to middle class blacks, but they wanted to be just like them. The best example is how much respect blacks had for education and black teachers. Any teacher walking down any street in the South could say anything to any black student, and they was like their mother had spoken to them. So that was high respect for black teachers, and of course, a number of blacks were making a lot of money. I mean, segregation was good for entrepreneurs because, number one, white funeral homes didn't bury blacks. White barbers didn't cut black hair. Okay? So blacks controlled the taxi industry, going through. So, and what I'm really trying to do is remind blacks of the values we once had that we don't have today.
The Negro Chamber activities provided an atmosphere for the determined and dedicated business owner to thrive. A young couple from Chicago arrived in Houston in 1935 and chose the Pilgrim Building to house their 20-year-old family business, the Franklin Beauty School. James Jemison and his bride, Abby Franklin Jemison, opened a beauty college complete with dormitories. The Jemison son, Ron, remembers hanging around the school as a small child and then working in the business as a teenager.
In the 50s, of course, I became more active because we also manufactured products. And it was my job to eventually take over that portion of the business. And we had a laboratory in our garage, and we actually manufactured hair care products that we sold to the public.
As hair care was the 5th largest industry in America at the time, the Franklin Beauty School attracted students from all over the country. The Jemisons built a business, a fortune, and helped change a community.
My father was exceptionally busy with every organization in the city of Houston from the day that he set foot on Houston soil, not only with the Chamber, but also with the YMCA, the Urban League, and every other association. He also met with many groups, and at one time they actually sued the city of Houston to allow blacks to use Herman Park golf course.
And Jemison is seen in many archive photos of chamber and community activities because to be an African-American business leader at the time meant an automatic inclusion into the civil rights movement. This was a time when a man named Mac Hanna rose to prominence in business. Hanna was a multimillionaire who owned a life insurance company in 3rd Ward, founded a mortgage company and a savings and loan. Hanna also helped bail students out of jail during a sit-in.
Arthur George Gaston was born in a log cabin built by his grandparents after they were freed from slavery. He eventually built a business of providing services often denied to African Americans during the years of segregation. When he died in 1996 at the age of 103, Mr. Gaston was worth over $130 million.
I was 21 years old when Uncle Arthur died, and by then some of the more tangible of his accomplishments had been impressed upon me. Walking around downtown Birmingham, it was impossible not to notice his name clinging in bold letters to the side of so many buildings. Impossible not to recognize that it was not just the members of my family who deferred to him, but people all over the city. I learned that he had built businesses and that he owned a bank, that he had known Martin Luther King Jr. and had shaken President Kennedy's hand more than once. Though his climb up from the bottom of society was never discussed per se, I began to understand why Uncle Arthur's expectations of us were always so high. Sometimes it seemed impossibly so. There were no excuses in his house or when he was in yours. He and Auntie both made it clear that excellence was the only option. And though their methods could have had precisely the opposite effect, the fact of the matter was that you wanted to be better when you were around them. They made you want to measure up. None of this was accomplished with threats or rewards. It was simply the case that you looked at Uncle Arthur and knew, just knew, that this was a man who had done something big, and it made you want to be big someday too.
Capitalism is amazingly productive, but it has 2 big flaws. Firstly, it's systematically inclined to ignore the sufferings of workers unless regularly prodded not to. and the wealth of companies is often built up on satisfying what are not the essential needs of human beings. Fortunes are made on making unhealthy food or bad television programs.
Harvard economist Richard Freeman noted, "The triumph of globalization and market capitalism has improved living standards for billions, while concentrating billions among the few." So it's kind of a mixed bag. The very poor are doing a little better, but the very rich are now a lot richer than everybody else.
There are about 35 countries where capitalism is now well developed. It probably works best in Germany, but in the remaining 161 nations, it arguably isn't working very well at all. This is a source of much puzzlement and distress. Billions of dollars in aid are transferred every year from the rich to the poor parts of the world. These materialist interventions will never work, because the problem isn't really a material one to begin with. Instead, certain countries, for Weber, fail to succeed at capitalism because they trust too much in miracles. They like to celebrate now rather than invest in tomorrow, and their members feel it's acceptable to steal from the community in order to enrich their families, favoring the clan over the nation. It's a nation's attitudes, hopes, and a sense of what life is about that produces an economy that either flourishes or flounders. To reduce poverty, one has to start at the level of ideas. What the World Bank and the IMF should be giving sub-Saharan Africa is not, in a Weberian analysis, money and technology, but a new outlook, and reminds us that ideas may be far more important than tools or money in changing nations.
Although he's often considered the father of communism because he co-wrote the Communist Manifesto, Marx was above all a philosopher and a historian. It's just that unlike most philosophers and historians, he advocated for revolution. His greatest work, Das Kapital, sets out to explain the world of the 19th century in historical and philosophical terms. So Marx was writing in 19th century England, and there were two classes that mattered: the workers and the capitalists. The capitalists owned most of the factors of production, in this case, land and the capital to invest in factories. The workers just had their labor. So the class struggle here is between capitalists who want labor at the lowest possible price and the workers who want to be paid as much as possible for their work.
Charles Dickens, one of Victorian England's most passionate critics of unrestrained capitalism, publishes a novel, Hard Times. Set in the fictional town of Coketown, a version of Manchester, it takes aim at heartless capitalists like Mr. Gradgrind, who abuse their workers, exploit young children in mines and chimneys, and use their relentless capitalist logic to blind them to their desecration of nature and human life. Dickens argues that capitalism is evil because it encourages appalling conditions for the producers. Under the sway of capitalist logic, otherwise quite nice people will keep coming up with reasons why it's okay to employ a child in a factory or to let poor people starve once they've reached the end of their working lives.
This man, Mao Zedong, brought a country of 540 million peasant people into the modern world. He did it after half a century of war and civil war. He used a mixture of nationalism and communism to bind the people together. He led the Chinese Communist Party for 42 years.
Although similar ideas have existed both naturally and intentionally since the dawn of time, the most common form of communism comes from the work of German philosophers Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, in what is today known as Marxism. In particular, Marxism is focused on the exploitation of the worker. It's based on the idea that any profit generated by the worker but instead goes to the business owner is a form of inequality and should be abolished. In recent history, several countries, including the USSR, China, Vietnam, and Cuba, have attempted to institute their own versions of communism. Marxism-Leninism prioritizes the infallibility of its dictatorship government. The rationale is that any benefit to the state would also be a benefit for the people. However, in practice, this has meant that the ruling party can massively depreciate the population's standard of living for the good of the state. Unfortunately, attempts to achieve this political philosophy have led to lower standards of living, government corruption, and in the case of the USSR, total collapse and failure. A number of reasons have been put forth as to why communism hasn't worked out historically. But the strongest criticism of the philosophy is that communism removes the incentive for people to work harder than they absolutely have to. It also leads to resentment of those who work less hard but receive the same. In general, communism is described as being great in theory while disastrous in practice.
China is the world's second largest economy and the biggest importer. But 40 years ago, it was a poor, largely rural nation, with at least 30% of its population living in poverty. That started to change in 1978, when China launched major economic reforms. The first were agricultural. Farmers were allowed to sell their surplus crops on the open market. Success in agriculture and more open trade led to the privatization of other state-owned enterprises. In 1980, it created 4 special economic zones to encourage foreign direct investment. As the economy opened up to the outside world, companies flooded into China to build factories and take advantage of cheap labor. Stock markets in Shanghai and Shenzhen opened in 1990. Economic growth boomed the following decade, averaging 10% a year. More than 500 million people have been lifted out of poverty since China's economic reforms began. It's been called an economic miracle, and one the global economy has come to depend on.
What exactly is socialism? Well, in its most simple form, socialism is when a population collectively owns and controls the means of production and distributes the end result proportionally. In practice, however, control is usually delegated to the state, while the distribution usually comes in the form of underlying social welfare to satisfy everyone's basic needs like housing, education, and healthcare. The end-all purpose is to guarantee a level playing field for all members in a society, thereby removing class distinctions based on ownership. For example, in the US's capitalist society, high-quality education is expensive, meaning that those who can afford it are generally given better opportunities. Those who can't are forced to compete at a material disadvantage. This leads to class inequality, not on the basis of talent or ability, but on generational wealth. By comparison, in countries like Finland, where high-quality education is free, everyone is given the same opportunity to succeed or fail, regardless of their financial status. If that sounds a bit idealistic, that's because it's supposed to. Early socialism was predicated on the idea that if we could eliminate classes and have true societal equality, it would be a utopia. It's important to note that there are no 100% socialist countries, but rather different socioeconomic systems with socialist undertones. The same is true of Nordic countries, which employ socialist programs combined with a capitalist economy. But why are the Nordic countries doing so well, while Russia is still recovering? Well, like any political system, socialism has a countless number of variations. The two most dominant are social democracy, as practiced by Sweden and Bernie Sanders, and the Marxism-Leninism form of socialism used by the Soviet Union, China, and Cuba. A social democracy generally prioritizes improving quality of life through equal rights and opportunities, bolstered by a state-run welfare system and on top of a capitalist economy. The biggest difference between the two is that socialism says that all workers should get an equal share in profit and property, while communism says that there shouldn't be money or ownership in general, and everyone should get as much as they need and work as much as they can.
Congress passes the most sweeping civil rights bill ever to be written into the law, and thus reaffirms the conception of equality for all men that began with Lincoln and the Civil War 100 years ago. 5 hours after the House passes the measure, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is signed at the White House by President Johnson. Before an audience of legislators and civil rights leaders who had labored long and hard for passage of the bill, President Johnson calls for all Americans to back what he calls a turning point in history.
Philosophy professor Angela Davis admitted that she is a member of the Communist Party.
Hoover put her on the top 10. Everybody had a file on her.
Her first lecture drew 2,000 students.
Angela's education is now being put into practice.
Angela Davis purchased 4 guns.
There is a conspiracy in the land. It's a conspiracy to wipe out the black community as a whole.
Racism is an excuse used for capitalism, and we know that racism is just it's a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people, and we're going to have to put it back in the hands of the people.
The Houston Negro Chamber of the 1960s promoted its agenda during a very tumultuous time nationwide. The fight for justice led to urban violence that claimed some black businesses as victims.
This was in the middle of, arguably even at the zenith of black power. In the midst of all this black power, we got blacks breaking in black folks' stores. Now, you know, obviously that dog will not hunt. To my dad's credit, he never allowed that to discourage him. And the African American community was very kind towards my dad in terms of, you know, granting him patronage. But wouldn't it be a lot better if we didn't, you know, steal from one another or discourage one another?
Rising crime in historically black neighborhoods and the intoxicating feeling of freedom as Jim Crow crumbled led to widespread relocation of African Americans to the suburbs, a flight that eventually decimated the bustling black commerce centers of West Dallas, Lyons, and Dowling streets, and left the community figuring out how to rebuild itself economically.
And we became a desegregated or integrated community, we lost a little snap, if you would. Now, I'm not saying let's go back to segregated days, but I'm saying that America and Houston would be better places to live if we as African Americans had brought some of that same, what shall we say, collaboration, coordination, collaboration, coordination, and collaboration to the table, and that same sense of pride.
Negro customers can no longer be pigeonholed. They cannot be classified as prospects who trade only in certain stores, certain neighborhoods. Today, Negroes shop downtown. They shop in supermarkets. They shop in small neighborhood stores. They'll buy from anyone who wants to sell to them. But we all know that before you can sell to customers, you've got to get to know them.
The secret of selling to the Negro is expressed in one word. That word is recognition. Now, there's nothing unusual about that. People want to be recognized. They need recognition. That's basic in all of us. But perhaps because he's had so little of it, the Negro needs even more. He needs to feel important and appreciated. For a long time, the Negro has been sold a lot of shoddy, second-class merchandise. So now he asks for name brands in order to make sure he gets his money's worth. Buying by brand, that's the first important Negro buying habit.
Former Michigan City man Richard Hatcher became one of the first two black mayors ever elected in major cities. He and Carl Stokes of Cleveland were elected the same day. And the next New Year's Day, Hatcher took over, held his first official news conference announcing his cabinet.
And I will faithfully discharge.
And I will faithfully discharge
the duties of the office of mayor.
The duties of the office of mayor.
In and for the city of Los Angeles.
In and for the city of Los Angeles.
According to the best of my ability.
According to the best of my ability.
So help me God.
So help me God.
In October 1973, Atlanta made history. Maynard Jackson was elected the first black mayor of a large southern city.
Never, 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 never shall I let you down.
By a narrow margin, Carl Stokes had been elected mayor of America's 10th largest city.
Those of us who were Polish, Hungarian, Negroes, Germans, Irish, all Jewish, yeah.
Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, it started with 2 words: defend yourselves.
Is that gun loaded, boy?
I tell you, officer, it wasn't, but now it is.
They protected their own.
Stop pushing poison in the neighborhood.
Panthers, y'all worse than the police. They fought for respect.
You brutalize our community, we will defend ourselves.
They demanded justice.
We're not anti-white, we're anti-oppression.
They were the soul.
We're seizing the time.
Behind the struggle.
Power to the people.
Rated R.
I mean, if this is truly a melting pot in the country where we care about it, and Lady Liberty got a hand like this, she really loves us, then we really need to be like that. And it needs to be the black kids. If there's a white person who got money, then he need to help them. He need to help black kids, Mexican kids, Korean kids, whatever. But it need to be real. And it need to be before we all die, and then you say, oh, I made a mistake. We should have gave them some money. We really should have helped these folks. It's going to be too late.
What we need to do is create a political movement, what I call a political revolution, where millions of people come together, stand up.
Coalition, right?
Coalition, absolutely a coalition. You know, based on the trade union movement, the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the gay community movement, and bringing people together to tell the billionaire class that they cannot have it all. And that's the case right now. People don't appreciate how much power Wall Street has, corporate America, the corporate media. And we got to take them on.
But we blew this thing a long time ago when they started the purge against communism in this country and against the voice of those who saw hope in a design for socialist theory and for the sharing of wealth and for the equality of humankind. When we abandoned our vision and vigils on that topic, I think we sold out ourselves.
Let's talk about your relationship with Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez. You seem to have a different opinion of him than many folks in America do. You've praised him time and again. I believe you have had a meeting with him back in 2006. What about Chavez appeals to you?
Well, first of all, I consider the President Hugo Chavez my friend, and certainly an ally about the things that I talk about in the world.
Capitalism needed racism in order to operate. To explain further, capitalism needed to steal things in order to come into fruition. If you're talking about a whole class of the bourgeoisie, where are they going to get that injection? They get that from stealing. It's called primitive accumulation, and it's something that has been at the beginning of every new economic system. The racist culture that we have is necessitated by capitalism. We won't get rid of that racist culture until we get rid of capitalism.
I think it's very unfair, and I think it's very stupid. I mean, it doesn't make sense.
Ebony Boost, who has 3 children and is currently on welfare, just learned about the state's new policy that will take effect October 1st. If your child is truant, missing more than 10 days of school, your family's welfare cash benefits will be cut off.
Maybe they have household problems, their parents, there might be something going on in the home, but I think they just need to investigate that further.
The Michigan Department of Human Services keeping tabs on kids ages 6 to 15 years old who will now have to prove they attended school. Threatening to take away state aid is expected to make parents more responsible.
It was the most memorable time of my life. It was a touching moment because I never thought this day would ever happen. I won't have to worry about putting gas in my car. I won't have to worry about paying my mortgage. You know, if I help him, he's gonna help me.
You got Obama phone?
Yes, everybody in Cleveland, low minority, got Obama phone. Keep Obama in president, you know. He gave us a phone.
He gave you a phone.
Do more.
In my case, they done been in my life 6 months, and I'm homeless.
37-year-old Angel Adams blames the system for her problems. We called the Department of Children and Families to see what they've been doing to help. DCF says Hillsborough Kids Incorporated has been helping by paying Adams rent, even providing her furniture. Adams says it isn't enough.
Somebody needs to pay for all my children and my And Gary, all our suffering, all our pain, somebody needs to be held accountable, and they need to pay.
I'm Professor Walter Williams at George Mason University, Fairfax, Virginia. The illegitimacy is entirely new, as well as the high unemployment among blacks is entirely new. So one has to ask, well, what is the cause? I think that the cause is the welfare state, and particularly among the illegitimacy is that if you ask any economist, whether he's a liberal or conservative, he's going to tell you if you tax something, you're going to get less of it. And if you subsidize something, you're going to get more of it. And what we've been doing, we've been subsidizing slovenly behavior. That is, it's less costly for the girl to have a baby out of wedlock. Then the social stigma associated with illegitimacy has virtually vanished. Years ago when I was a kid, if a girl made a mistake, and it was very rare, relatively rare, even in North Philadelphia, if a girl made a mistake, she was an embarrassment to her family. And very often she is sent down south to live with her relatives while she is pregnant. Today, it's entirely different. Your girls have babies out of wedlock, and then they have baby showers and things like this. They celebrate. It's no more social stigma associated with it. And so what we've been doing, I think, as a nation, we've been subsidizing irresponsible behavior.
What are the 5 biggest issues facing blacks in America? Here's my list. Problem number 5, the victim mentality. Nothing holds someone back more than seeing himself as a victim. Why? Because the victim is not responsible for his situation. Everything is someone else's fault. And the victim sees little chance of improving his life. How can he get ahead if someone is holding him back? All this makes the victim unhappy, frustrated, and angry. This is how too many blacks see themselves, as victims. So much so that their victim status becomes their primary identity and their ruling ideology. I call it victimology. Unfortunately, many black churches preach this victimology. Many black parents pass it on to their children, inner city schools teach it to their students, and the black media reinforce it. Meanwhile, the NAACP and other black grievance groups fundraise on it.
So we're delighted that so many of you are here this morning joining us for this conversation about the black agenda. Today's conversation is really about, as I said earlier, an African-American agenda. Whether or not there ought to be one, how it is that we engage one and advance one, that is to say, an African-American agenda in the era of Obama. How do we advance an African-American agenda in the era of Obama? And how do we do that in what many are calling a post-racial America?
We took the big issues like health, but we did a drill down and said, but what will it mean in our communities? How do we deal with the disparities? How do people even get into the situation we're in? What's happening in their environments that's leading to asthma and obesity and heart disease?
We acknowledge that anytime you talk about black folk in America, you're talking about a state of emergency, especially for black poor and working people. So that when you talk about love, you're making it a priority to say, America, keep track of the prison industrial complex, keep track of the dilapidated housing, keep track of the disgraceful school systems, keep track of the unemployment rates and underemployment rates and unavailable health care, child care. That is what it means to talk about a black agenda.
Our pain today, even as we deal with the health care challenge, and it is a real challenge, that in Chicago, 3,200 black Americans die a year from health disparity. More die a year in this city from health care disparity than in the 9/11 terrorist attack 10 years ago. Obviously, those in the most pain must have some priority attention.
Hi, I'm Laura Flanders. Today on the show, a conversation about capitalism and white supremacy with two brilliant minds, Dr. Cornel West and Professor Rick Wolff. Welcome you both to the program. I'm so glad to have you here.
Blessing to be here.
You've been revisiting old masters. I know because we did a panel together about Tom Paine. You're doing another panel with Gail Dines and Chris Hedges. Cornell can't make it, but you're talking about Marx. But Marx was a German writing about industrialism in 19th century Northern Europe. Is that relevant to people here in the States in the 21st century, especially African American people?
I think it's very relevant. Karl Marx was one of the great prophetic figures of the 19th century because he had an analysis of capitalism that kept track of the precious humanity of working people and poor people. No one can deny under global capitalism that there's been an escalation of oligarchs, of plutocrats. No one can deny that big banks and big corporations do not dominate government. No one can deny that working people are not benefiting to the degree to which hedge fund folk are, Wall Street people are, so that wealth inequality and all that goes with it has to be, one has to come to terms with it. So in that sense, Marxist analysis is probably the most indispensable form of analysis to make sense of a highly financialized monopoly capitalism in our day.
What explains the historical infatuation between blacks and Jews? Jews have had a long historical association with the central state. Any of you who know European history will know that in many cases the relationship was between the Jews and the monarch. The Jews believed in a strong central state because only the strong central state could protect them, and Jews exchanged economic vitality. They made the place rich. The king, meanwhile, protected them against the local notables. And today, the incarnation of that is the I have a hard time even saying it, the New Deal, Great Society, the nanny state, the bureaucratic colossus, this loathsome creature that is run by, the social workers with an agenda. And Jews have always been part of that, and you can make the argument that this is a kind of client relationship they have. They love this kind of thing. And once again, blacks make the perfect state client. I mean, they go, it's womb to tomb, from program to program, from transition to transition. They never leave it. And if you are going to have a central state that takes care of a client, blacks are the perfect client.
It was the middle of the 1970s. Police repression and personal quarrels had broken the spirit of the Black Panthers. The militants were going home. Everyone was trying to find their place in society, a society where they may have been electing the first black mayors, but where for most American blacks, recession was ravaging the big cities and destroying communities.
Lose yourself on Skag and skip out for beer during commercials because the revolution will not be televised.
Among the leaders of the civil rights movement, the energy of soul power had given way to bitterness.
Baltimore is the worst place in America for a black male to grow up and live.
We're living under third world conditions.
It's a very segregated by race and class city.
When it comes to unemployment and access to resources, it's easy to go crazy here.
People are suffering here in West Baltimore. and they're being ignored, even from people who live a half a mile from them, because Baltimore is a very segregated city. You could literally walk across the street and be in a different tax bracket.
We've had a series of ineffective political leaders, both black and white, in Baltimore.
Too many people have spent generations building up this city for it to be destroyed by thugs.
Baltimore is adding a new tagline to its name. It's now the city where children are known to have the worst odds of escaping poverty. That's according to 2 new studies conducted by Harvard University researchers.
Most people don't have jobs in this community. It's very hard to get a job around here. It's very hard to get a job in this community once you labeled as a black man with a background.
If you got 10 people, you got 2 working. And they had to fight to get that. I mean, there's no jobs for us out here.
It's a community that suffers from unemployment and poverty rates that are well above the national average. According to the most recent data available, Sandtown has a poverty rate at about 30%. That's more than double the national average. At the same time, the unemployment rate is at 21%, and that's more than 3 times the national level. This neighborhood hasn't gone completely unnoticed. 2 decades ago, a developer and city officials pumped in $130 million, hoping to transform the community from the bottom up. Unfortunately, the high dollar amount wasn't quite enough to make a significant change.
This is America's ghost town, just 25 miles from downtown Chicago. Gary, Indiana, dubbed a symbol of urban blight by some, compared to post-evacuation Chernobyl by others. Gary's population has been cut by half as many fled in search of work. It is now almost exclusively African American, over 84%. Up to 1/3 are poor in one of the top 10 most dangerous cities in America.
Detroit, Michigan. The city is suffering from urban decay with over 32% of residents living below the national poverty line. According to FBI reports, Detroit has the highest rate of violent crime of any city over 200,000. 1. Camden, New Jersey. Camden has been on Forbes' list of America's most miserable cities for years. Riddled with urban decay and political corruption, over 42% of its residents live below the poverty line. It also has 560% more crime than the national average.
Black people are victims of racism. It's not accidental that the cities around the nation that have the largest percentage of blacks have the largest percentage of poverty, have the largest percentage of crime, have the largest percentage of unemployment.
But in Detroit, blacks aren't just the majority, they're the authority. They run the police, the courts, the schools, and City Hall. But black political power hasn't meant black economic prosperity.
In my time in Detroit, I have driven and walked past mile after mile of decayed, rotting neighborhoods that look like war zones, burned out buildings, crack houses.
And if you've been coming in any length of time, those were there when I became mayor. And a whole lot of that's been restored.
Look at cities like Detroit, Philadelphia, and Baltimore. They've been run by progressive Democrats for decades. If their liberal policies were at all effective, these cities should have become models of economic growth and prosperity. Instead, they're models of dysfunction. By fostering and exploiting the victim mentality, discouraging self-examination, subsidizing baby mamas, and making excuses for black thugs, so-called progressive policies don't alleviate the problems that afflict the black community. They aggravate those problems. Unwavering loyalty to progressive liberal policies is the primary reason these dire conditions persist. It both makes them possible and perpetuates them. It's no coincidence that progressivism is the common thread that binds predominantly black cities where single-parent homes, failing schools, rampant poverty, and crime predominate.
If we look back over history,
when the Congress was controlled by the Democrats for 40 consecutive years, if we look at the results control what has happened in black America, we saw greater poverty. If we take the statistics from 1970s to the 21st century, what we see very clearly is that poverty has gone from 11% to 15%. These are classic examples that the policies of the left have not worked. The brilliance of the American economy happens through business ownership and entrepreneurial spirit. So whether you own the business or not, success is possible if you A, have a good education, B, have a strong work ethic. For the average person who can work, these two key components come together and form a foundation. That is the way that you eradicate poverty. All the social programs that we've had, we have the largest government we've ever had in the history of the country. We have more nonprofit organizations working on the same issue, and yet we have higher percentage of people living in poverty.
I lived in Philadelphia for a while, and it's a great city, a really, truly great city. But it is a city that has enslaved itself with socialism and corruption like I haven't seen. Why is it? Why is it, sir, that some of our Washington, D.C., Detroit, Philadelphia, our biggest cities are enslaving themselves?
Well, most of the inner cities are run by black liberal Democrats. The mayor, for the most part, are black. The police chiefs are black. City council men and women are black. And yet, the cities are out of control. Black-on-black crime out of control. 70% of black babies born out of wedlock nationwide. And in the state of Indiana, 80% of black babies are born out of wedlock. And it is because of socialism. Most black Americans, not all, but most black Americans have a socialist mentality. And one of the big mistakes that black Americans made was to elect politicians, especially liberal politicians, thinking that it was going to enhance their lives. They thought that if they had black Democrats in control of the city, somehow or another, the black life would get better.
W.B. Du Bois says capitalism is like having 4 years of corn. You eat, save, and sell, and use the seeds for next year's planting. That's capitalism. Where in there, where you see blacks selling, producing, okay, and using seeds for next year's harvest? Do you see me in either one of those definitions? Did I mention anything about social integration? Did I mention anything about civil rights?
We've spent most of our lives focusing politically on things that are non-inheritable. See, when the civil rights movement started, you talking about your integration years. Is it your product of an integrated generation? What did your generation focus on? You focused on welfare, food stamp, public housing, okay, civil rights, social integration, preferential treatment, getting a job. How do you inherit those things? What is there to inherit?
So politics is not going to solve all our problems. Tell the folks at home that.
Politics,
Professor Gimbu,
is not going to solve most of our problems. The most politics that affects people is at the local level.
Yeah, that's right.
Local politics affect people mostly. National politics has some impact, but very, very minimal impact in regards to the quality of life of the average person.
But here it is. Here's the system, right? The United States government is funded by tax dollars. So you wrote that down? The United States government, who regulates what? The economy, is funded by tax dollars. It is not a private entity. It is a public entity. Now, the United States government, contrary to what you believe, is actually you. It's not the president. It's not Congress. It's not the House of Representatives. You understand it? It's not the lawmakers. The government is you.
What are the goals of taxation? At the most basic level, taxes raise money for government services. Taxes are used to promote the well-being of society, at least well-being as defined by the government in power. They help us afford services markets might not pay for on their own. Things like public safety and national defense and education. Taxes can be used as a way to redistribute wealth in a society, from people who have more to people who have less.
Fair housing for all human beings who live in this country is now a part of the American way of life.
In 1968, President Johnson signed the Fair Housing Act. For the first time, racial language was removed from federal housing policy. Non-white families began moving into traditionally white communities in numbers. The Frisbees moved from Queens to suburban Roosevelt, only a few miles from Levittown.
When I moved into a neighborhood, I thought it would stay intact the way it was. On the street that I moved on when I moved there, it was predominantly white. Within 2 years, it was predominantly black.
The white population of Detroit began one of the largest migrations in U.S. history. In 1960, Detroit had almost 1.2 million white residents. By 1980, there were only 400,000. Businesses evaporated. Once thriving commercial strips like Gratiot, Grand River, and Livernois became ghost towns.
Hey everybody, it is Yvette Carnell from Breaking Brown, as we do every Monday and Wednesday, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, coming to you with another episode of Breaking Brown Live.
Minstrels playing to conservative sentiment turned their attention to free blacks in the North, and a new character appeared beside the Southern Sambo, Zip Coon.
Transcendentalism is that spiritual cognizance of the psychological irrefragability.
A dandy and a buffoon, Zip Coon's attempts to imitate whites mocked the notion of racial equality. Together, Zip Coon and Sambo provided a double-edged defense of slavery. Zip Coon, proof of blacks' ludicrous failure to adapt to freedom, and Sambo, the fantasy of happy darkies in their proper place.
There is no data to back up this idea that the reason that African Americans are behind white people in terms of aggregating wealth. There's no reason at all to believe that has anything to do with stuff that we're doing wrong. There's no reason at all to believe that has anything to do with stuff that we're doing wrong.
Black people believe that if you got some Negro over talking people, babbling, rambling on, talking loud, fished mouth, and all this gesticulating, that means that he made a point. This is where your pastors come from. But to black people, that impresses us. He talking loud, he sound confident, he must be good, he must be right. That impresses most black people.
I'm going to begin tonight's episode with a question. What if I told you that in a lot of cities, the unemployment rate for young black men, what if I told you, age like 20 to 34, what if I told you that the unemployment rate for a lot of those men was above 40%? Just think about it. If I told you that, if I came to your house right now or your job right now and I said, hey, the unemployment rate, the jobless rate for young black men is 40% in a lot of cities, what would you say to me? What would your answer be to me? Would you say, Yvette, that these people didn't do what they were supposed to do in school? Would you say that they must have messed up? Would you say they probably been to jail? Would you say that these men aren't worth anything anyway, and that's why they run off and leave their babies? What would you tell me if I told you that that's what the jobless rate was for black men, for African American men in a lot of these cities? What would you say? Well, listen, if you answered any of those answers that I just gave you, if you answered and said there's something that the problem is these men, is the reason that they have this high jobless rate, if that was your answer, then I'm here to tell you today that you are part of the problem.
Congratulations.
Congratulations. Congratulations. You are a part of the problem. And if you want to talk about solutions, you got to stop being part of the problem. When you look at, and we can name off these cities, we're talking about Milwaukee, Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, Philadelphia, Baltimore, D.C. What those numbers, and let me just make one point about those numbers. Those numbers in terms of young black men are non-institutionalized. What that means is that these are just black men who are not in jail. Now, mind you, black men are incarcerated 10,000 per 100,000. If you were to put them back in that number, the number will be even higher than that. It will be astronomical. Nothing that the first world has ever seen. What I'm telling you, black people, is that is a sign. That is a sign of systemic failure. That is not a sign of individual failure. When a group of people fails in mass in those numbers, that's not an individual failure. That's a systemic failure because that group of people was targeted. That's what that means. When you see that on that level and that number, that means that those people were targeted. That means that these black men have been targeted, and what has happened to them has affected the entire black family. That has affected the entire black family. And so I think about that when I think about people saying, well, my only responsibility is to take care of my kid till 18. Or they going to the military, they got to get out of my house. Well, they don't have the tools and they're being targeted to do anything else. That's what you have to understand.
You go into these black communities right now, you don't own and control a damn thing of any value. Nope. Or you don't have anything to export. Those who produce and control, those are the controllers. You can't control unless you produce. We are nothing. We're 100% consumers and zero producers. We produce absolutely nothing.
I should not have to come to Baltimore and find absolutely no black businesses of any nature. Why am I? And I go to Detroit, Michigan again as an example. Detroit, Michigan is a 90% black city. They got 146 gas stations in Detroit, Michigan. 146 gas stations in Detroit, Michigan. Arabs own 141 in a black city. In the black city of Detroit, Michigan, Arabs own not only the gas stations, they own the grocery stores, party stores, liquor stores. The Koreans in Detroit, they own the barbecue restaurants, the nail shops, the wig shops, the hair products, distributorships. The East Indians in Detroit, they own the rest of the businesses. They own the Dunkin' and Donuts, the cheap motels, the check cashing services. Blacks own nothing in a city where they're the majority population. I got 1 million black folk in Detroit that owns nothing. Now, what's the impact of that? That's why in the 2000 census, The United States government declared Detroit to be the poorest city in the United States with the highest crime rate. And everybody's sitting back in the black leadership saying, oh, why are we so poor? You're poor because you're stuck on stupid. There is a direct relationship in this country between how many businesses you own and how poor you're going to be as a group. Those groups that have no businesses are going to be poor and imprisoned. It is not the government's responsibility to help you do anything. The government's responsibility and the police department's responsibility is to put you in jail and keep you out of the way. When you have a Katrina situation, which on one of my videos, I started talking about Katrina 7 to 8 years before it even happened. If you don't have any businesses, you're going to be poor. The reason black people are the poorest people in the United States is because we don't own businesses. Now watch this now. The reason black people are the poorest people in the United States is because we don't own businesses. The reason black people are the poorest people in the United States is because we don't own businesses. In this country, in America, the group with the highest income in America today are Asians. The median family income for an Asian in America is $55,000 for a median family income. Y'all follow this along, so when long after I've left you this evening, you'll never forget this as long as you live. The median family income from an Asian is the highest in the United States at the end of the group, $55,000. Underneath them are whites. The median family income from a white person is about $53,000 to $54,000. The median family income for these Hispanics that you're also worried about and getting them into the country are over blacks. They're at $32,000 and $33,000. The median family income for black people is $19,400. Now, why are black folk on the bottom in income? Here it is now. Asians got a $55,000 income, median family income over here. Here's why they got that income. 1 out of every 10 Asians are in business. Again, $55,000 income, they're at the top. 1 out of 10 are in business. Let's go down to the next level. You got whites now over here. Whites are at $53,000 to $54,000 income in that general range. They got 1 out of every 34 in business. Hispanics got 1 out of 54 in business. Black folk at the bottom with 1 out of 104. If you don't have any businesses, you're going out of existence.
No one says the folks in Compton live on Easy Street. It's one of the poorest places in LA County. They've even talked about bankruptcy. But it may also be a place for easy money. Lucrative contracts, unpaid loans, money for meetings that last just minutes. It's all part of our 3-month investigation into Compton City Hall. We had a lot of questions, and it was difficult to get answers, as you'll soon see.
I'm trying to figure out how much money the city council members make. How much do they get for a meeting? Do you know that? The budget says $77,996. I think it's for the council members. Are you saying that's for the mayors?
We eventually determined that each city council member makes $55,000 for that part-time position.
We also learned that most of the money, 73%, comes from sitting on commissions that may meet as little as 3 minutes.
Take January 8th, 2013. Just before the regular city council meeting, the 4 commissions convened. At 5:25, the Housing Commission starts. 5:34, it's Public Finance. 5:46, Gaming Commission. And at 5:51, the Urban Community Development Commission starts. Our research shows in 2012, the city council members earned $39,000 each for serving on 4 commissions, which met for a total of 26 hours. That shakes out to $1,500 per hour. None of this surprises Compton resident Joyce Kelly.
How long do these meetings take? I'm assuming that you go to them.
I go to them. They're all the same time.
How long do they take usually?
Between 3 and 10 minutes. No longer than 10 minutes.
Joyce has missed just 4 city council meetings in 9 years.
Do they do anything?
Well, they listen to the audience comments, and then they may comment on that.
And then they decide something?
It's just there's nothing to decide.
By the way, Compton is now being audited by the California State Controller John Chun. The state wants to know what happened to all of that money distributed by the state's now defunct redevelopment agency. Compton is one of 400 communities being audited. Val?
The 10 poorest cities, the 10 most dangerous cities, with the highest home foreclosure rates, with the highest high school dropout rates, with the highest imprisonment rates. Guess what they were? Cities where black folk are the majority populations.
Well, what whites did throughout history, if you go back as far back and start looking at books about 100, 200 years old, you find that one of the things that white folk really appreciated about when they chose their slaves was called docility. Docility meant that black folk have an intern disposition that makes them willing to accept their position in life, their status in life, and all they want to do is be at the beck and call at the arm of whites. That was the term they always used, that he's a very docile black. Black folk have always been willing to accept their condition. They'll sit out on the corner and drink and smoke grass and sit up 2 steps from puking and everything else in the raggedy run-down houses just to say, I'm just alive. Other groups say, I'll die first. We won't say that.
Yeah. Some nations of ancient Africa were slaves. They were natural slaves. And when I say natural slaves, it means they had a propensity to be slaves. They had a orientation that made it easy for them to be slaves, and they were oriented in their minds and in their spirits in such a way that they knew how to function efficiently on a slave plantation. They had no desire to be free. Given the desire, they would stay on the plantation and fight to maintain the plantation setup. On the plantation, there were plantation politics that went along the lines of this. The slave master had a financial interest in the person or the body of the slave. He didn't want his mind. In fact, he as little in his mind that he could, as much in his mind as he could strip, he would strip it from the slave so that he could not use it. But the natural slave, even if you put it in his mind, he would not use knowledge. But the natural slave learned that his body had a value, his presence had a value, and he would use that presence to manipulate the slave master into getting certain things out of the slave master in exchange for being more efficient, for being a more efficient slave. So the slave and the ones who were best at it became the plantation leaders. They became the spokesperson to the master for the rest of the slaves, and the spokesperson from the master to the slaves. The slave, the natural slave leader realized that if he incited the slaves to burn the cotton fields, that the slave master would be presented with a choice to kill his slave, which would then cause him to lose profit because he had profit and he had an interest, a financial interest in the body of the slave himself. And if he killed the slave, then he couldn't get the work that was necessary done, or risk the possibility of being disrespected and by this slave, this arrogant slave, and thereby getting disrespected by the rest of the slaves, or negotiate to make the slave think that he's getting something in exchange for not burning down the cotton fields, and so he would then incite the other slaves or get the other slaves to work the cotton field. He became the slave leader because he had influence among the slaves, and he would keep the slaves from burning down the cotton fields. And so the slaves thought that they had this power over the master, when in reality all it was just a move on the part of the slave leader to get influence to the master. The master would chip off a crumb to the slave leader. He in turn would chip off a smaller crumb to the rest of the plantation, and they would do the work that was necessary. That's plantation politics. It has nothing to do with liberation. To threaten to burn down the plantation, first of all, tells you that you are not the owner of it, because the owner would never make such a threat. The owner would never burn down his own house. See, he would try to find any kind of way he could to keep it from being burnt down and keep others from burning it down. For example, during the 67 riots, you had foreigners with signs, "This is black owned. This is black owned." See, the owner will say and do anything to keep you from burning it down. But the Negro that don't own nothing and won't build nothing, he's quick to burn it down. He's quick to destroy it because it ain't his, and he knows it's not his. That's plantation politics. Right? Protest, scream, threaten, but you notice they never have a plan. They never say, here's the plan we're going to do. See? It's because they are slaves. They're the ones that chased out all your best thinkers. They're the ones that chased out all your best minds. They're the ones that slaughtered the innocent. And they're the ones that day in and day out lie to you. Now, if they could pull something off, why haven't they?
There are limits to what the government can do to help beyond providing a level playing field. This is another mentality that came out of the Great Society program, where Johnson said, equality of opportunity is not enough. We need equality of results, which you're never going to find. Not here, not anywhere, not ever. But that has become the goal. And then in the absence of that, to assume something's wrong. The government isn't doing all it can, so it needs to tip the scales a little bit here or a little bit there. That's where we get into trouble, that sort of social engineering. I mean, all the job programs, all the job training programs in the world aren't going to help if a group doesn't have a work ethic. School vouchers aren't going to work if a group doesn't value education. So it does, in some sense, what I get at the book, come back to cultural attitudes, antisocial, counterproductive cultural attitudes in the black community that don't get enough attention because that's not where the black leadership wants to focus matters.
Hey everybody, what's going on? I'm Dr. Boyce Watkins from Your Black World, and I'm here with, excuse me, my homegirl and partner in crime, Miss Yvette Carnell. How you doing today, Yvette?
I'm all right.
People are asking that, like, what are the solutions, right? Like, I mean, it's one thing to say that, okay, we have these extra factors that you're not accounting for, but at some point somebody says, okay, give us the alternative solution that's going to be better than the current solution that people are pursuing. So what solutions do you think will sort of help deal with some of these issues?
And so, there is no solution that I can see. We're drinking dirty water in this country. Flint is not the only city that's being lead poisoned that's mostly black. If government does not intervene, I don't see a solution. I don't see a solution that comes from just black people. And just because I'm looking at the numbers. And the thing that bothers me too is that this is a very conservative ideology. This is what conservatives say that you have to do for self and stuff like that. I'm not a conservative. So I think that's a part of my problem with it too.
Brown.com, and the main page, when you hit in, before you hit the home page, there's a place for you to subscribe to the newsletter. And again, what the newsletter is every week it's me in your inbox giving you news that I didn't put on Facebook, I didn't put anywhere, but impacts black people and improves the political education that you have. And so that's $2 a month, which is 50 cents per newsletter. Listen, people don't come from individual effort. People don't come from nothing. Anybody who tells you that I came from nothing is usually lying. I want you to show me. If you are filthy rich now and you're a white person, you were homeless, I want to see the pictures of you eating out of a garbage can. I want to see that picture because I don't believe you. I think most probably you're lying to me and you're lying to everybody else because you have to make up some kind of mythology that surrounds who you are because you have to make up a lie that people can tether themselves to and doesn't make them upset. You can't tell people, you can't just tell people, well, this is what I am. I came from these people and I got a whole bunch of money. I'm a billionaire. People will get upset. You have to tell people I was homeless and I struggled just like you. You have to tie into that struggle or nobody believes you. Or people will get the pitchforks. So these people know what they're doing. They're creating a lie. But the real truth is that these people come from hidden advantage. An extraordinary amount of hidden advantage and opportunity that they never let you know about. Hidden advantage and opportunity. I want you to think about that. And when somebody comes to you and starts saying, I'm a self-made millionaire, go back through their life and find that hidden advantage and opportunity that they're not telling you about. And so if we can break it down in terms of what creates a successful person, if we can break it down what creates a successful person, I would want to break it down like this. We would talk about wealth, timing, luck, and advantage. Let me say that again. Wealth, timing, luck, advantage. Okay? That's how you would break that down. That's how you would break it down. And I'm going to do this through the Gladwell book. And if you haven't gotten the book Outliers, you should probably pick it up. It's a good book because it breaks down this Horatio Alger stuff I did for myself. You didn't build that, I built that. People didn't, I had a family. It says at one point that Jeb Bush says he was a self-made man. How do you come from that much money, that much expertise, people in government, people in oil, and still say you're self-made? So part of the problem is that we've gotten to the point where people can just tell us all of these lies and it's okay.
I started as a janitor, and I started cleaning floors and toilets and doing those things that most people would never even dream of doing, but I wanted more. So I started to sell industrial materials and supplies along with the janitorial services. And that was my first entree into something bigger.
And something bigger was just around the corner.
In 1984, High Towers Petroleum Company had 2 employees. That was me and an accountant. From 2 people, we grew 1 contract to being able to manage all over this country.
Let's go get it! Let's go get it! All right, let's go.
To this day, our business is continuing to have double-digit growth. Last year, we did about $350 million in revenue, and we continue to increase our gallons. So this year, we'll probably do closer to $500 million.
My name is Hodari, and I'm the only one on the planet that does the LA Hood Life and Hip Hop Tour, which is probably one of the coolest tours in all of Hollywood, because this tour takes you all the way down through the hood. I'm sure you heard a lot about South Central. Y'all heard about South Central, right? All the way over in Australia. Did your travel agent tell you not to go there? Well, you know, I take a lot of people on my tour from all over the world, and they always tell me that when they booked their tour to Los Angeles, the travel agent told them, look, do not go to East LA, do not go to South Central, because those people over there are fucked up and they're crazy and they'll kill you. I started the hip hop tours about 3 years ago, and that was from going to my son's concerts. You know, I'm thinking it's gonna be a bunch of gangbangers up in there, you know, and they all set tripping and all that. But what it was a bunch of white kids from Beverly Hills, Brentwood, and Bel Air. They show up, they sagging their pants, they know all the words to the song. They talking shit about what it's like growing up in Compton and in South Central. But these guys have never ever been to these places that they hear in the rap songs. So I thought to myself, wouldn't it be an excellent idea to give them the opportunity to actually go to some of these places that the rappers are talking about, not only go there, but be safe and be able to jump out and take pictures in Compton and South Central that they could take back home with them. If you want to make it to the top of any business, whether it's tours, whether it's music, whether if it's a dope game, you got to get out there and get your hustle and get your grind on.
Black capitalism has been tried on many occasions, and the thing about black capitalism is that it has failed. Why has black capitalism failed? Well, black people don't have any money. It's just as simple as that.
Today we're doing the Business Roundtable, the 3rd year we've done it. Wells Fargo each year has sponsored this event, and we're talking today on franchising.
What we're hoping, as Herb said today, that this theme of building bridges and exposing you to the world of franchising, that we can help you uncover some opportunities and possibilities for you to be self-employed.
This is a business. And at the end of the day, you have people like myself at Yum saying, okay, has this company been profitable? Has this restaurant been profitable for us? And how much money and revenue have they generated for us?
And I got in GM's minority dealer program. And it took me about 10 years. And I bought Kings Mountain Chevrolet, I think, in December 2004.
But my company with 5 stores did $4.5 million. And I think that's not bad for a guy who used to drive trucks for a living. So I want them to be able to go out there charged up to say, hey, I can achieve this because I've met somebody else who's doing it, and they've kind of given me a roadmap on how to do it. Thank you.
Yeah, I got to. You know, you might as well put my name on the trophy now, next to E's, you know, it look nice.
Y'all ready for a good day?
Yes, we are. We gonna do what we can. Woo-hoo!
Come on now.
This is the winning group.
This is the winning group.
This
Right
is
here.
right
Right
here.
here. Gonna get it done.
Gonna get it done. Artie Collins from PNC Bank, she has helped us tremendously.
It's just been a great event. I think Herb does just a really good job, but the benefit is to the youth of this community. And I think that's what it's all about. So many people show up because we want to see our youth, the future leaders of tomorrow, be successful in all that they do.
What are people missing when they don't show up?
Well, they miss a great opportunity for fellowship. It's a great group of individuals that come out to support this event each year. And then ultimately, it sends a great message to people having opportunities to support our young people. That's what it's really all about.
You know, this is an enormous opportunity for Novant Health to partner to yet another community that is focused on doing great things. For us, it's about health and it's about wellness. And so, as you notice, we have given all of the players a pedometer. That's really to get them thinking about the value of 1,000 steps a day. So it's a great partnership. It's really all about health, and it's about some great golf. So that's why I'm here.
I knew that some of the most important businessmen in Charlotte were supporting this and would be here and fully supportive as well. So I want to come here and show my support and see if we can continue to build those social, cultural, and economic ties.
And that's what this man and his wife does from the standpoint of where you look at mentoring programs. You look at the fact that earlier this year they raised upwards of $30,000 for the Harvey B. Gantt Center. You look at the scholarship opportunities that they've provided for young African American men at a time that's very critical for young African American men. So the bottom line is they are dreamers, they are doers, and Charlotte is much better because of the work of Herb and Felicia Brown.
I can't be blessed by having these two guys on my bookends here, man. These people are incredible. So I am glad, and I thank you all and everybody who participates each and every year with the great content.
Like there's, you can have, like, let's be honest. I'm just going let's just really be honest right here. Let's just really break it down.
Oh Lord.
A black
that
kid.
statement made me nervous.
And
Go
a new
ahead.
character appeared beside the Southern Sambo, Zip Coon.
Transcendentalism is that spiritual cognizance of the psychological irrefragability.
A very vaginative proposition, my man. That is to say, prostitution pertaining to the cotex, you understand, of the argument. I myself have imminentized my liquidation, therefore, ergo, I...
Nigger is a global phenomenon. And if you're a nigger wherever you are, this is why I use the term with promiscuity. I understand that as a nigger in America, there are niggers throughout the world. Can we connect through our core niggerdom to understand the vicious ways in which we have been subverted?
Well, so the point is not the problem is FEMA, the problem is cronyism. If you get your boys, your posse, it's like Snoop saying, come on boys from Compton, let's go on and do our thing. It's the soft bigotry of low expectations.
I've heard that.
Yeah.
Now is...
You know what? You're one of the outstanding black people in this nation.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
With a show of hands, how many people were impacted?
Transcendentalism is that spiritual cognizance of the psychological
If we wanted to be serious about evidence, we might compare where blacks stood 100 years after the end of slavery with where they stood after 30 years of the liberal welfare state.
Yes.
Explain that.
Well, in 1960, which would be almost 100 years after the end of slavery, 22% of black kids grew up in homes with only one parent.
Just 22%?
Yes.
4 out of 5 were in homes with both parents?
Yes. 30 years later, after the liberal welfare state, that number had more than tripled. Education. Stuyvesant High School in New York, as you know, you get into only by passing a very tough exam. In 2012, the percentage of black students who had gotten into Stuyvesant High School was less than 1/10 of the percentage of black students who had gotten into Stuyvesant High School 33 years earlier.
I didn't know that.
There's Dunbar High School in Washington, which was an elite black high school for a very long time. In 1993, the number of kids out of Dunbar High School who went on to college was less than it was 60 years earlier, which would have been in the depth of the Great Depression. And so you can run through a whole bunch of other things like that. Look at the housing projects. The housing projects in the first half of the 20th century, during that first 100 years after slavery, did not have the high crime rates, the murder rates, the graffiti, all the rest of it that we associate. None of that was there. On Saturday mornings, it was common in the housing project of this earlier era for parents to leave their doors unlocked, because some of the parents could afford television, some couldn't. So the ones who had television would leave their doors unlocked, and the kids from the other families could come down there and watch television with them. Well, now the latest figures show that most people below the poverty line have 2 television sets and cable, but they wouldn't dare leave their doors unlocked in a public housing project.
So if the comparison between progress, simply the decency of of life available to people, they weren't. The families were intact, and schools worked, and the neighborhoods were more or less safe. People were able to lead decent lives. If the contrast between that world and the world we inhabit now is owing so directly to liberal policies intended, so we're told, to help African Americans, why do African Americans support the liberal at the rates of 90 and more %?
And before integration, blacks had their own communities. They had their own resources. They had their own businesses all over this country. And you young people here today, you don't know it, but I'm telling you, black folk had viable, competitive communities before integration. They had clean communities. We did not have the crime in the black communities. As a matter of fact, before integration, most blacks in America never had to lock their doors.
And I always say that these blacks in those days, even during segregation, did more and built more than we can even maintain today.
Okay, here, in terms of how we frame it, and I want you to really just think about, I want you to just think about this. I want you to just think about this because I like to frame things when I'm having a conversation with you. I really like to just frame it in a way that you can understand and everybody can understand. So when you look at the predicament of black people, of African Americans, descendants of slaves in this country, one of the questions that we should all ask each other is this: how did we get here? And how do we continue to be taken advantage of? The answer that I get to that a lot is, well, we get taken advantage of because, you know, we don't do for self and we don't do our own business and stuff like that. Well, I've shown you data to show that there's only a small amount of money. We own nearly no resources, and we're 13% of the population. So that's not the solution. And that's not how we get taken advantage of by not doing that. How we get taken advantage of is something very different. How we get taken advantage of is something very, very different. This is how we get taken advantage of. We get taken advantage of because, you know, I was having a conversation with somebody this morning and a friend of mine, and the way we get taken advantage of is because the people who take advantage of us, we're talking about capital holders. Those people know us better than we know ourselves. They know what we need in terms of our psychology, and they manipulate that to fit themselves. That's what they do. They manipulate who they are and who we are and what we need to make money for themselves, and that's how it works. But even if you look at those things, you have to say, what is the problem in terms of how capital takes advantage of us? How does capital always take advantage of black people? How do capital holders who are white, because I don't even need to say white capital holders, because there are only a few, you know, Nigeria and a few other places, and we have a couple here. There are only a few black real capital holders. But how do capital holders take advantage of black people?
T-Lab's 2015 Trailblazer Award winner is Mr. David L. Stewart, founder and chairman of Worldwide Technology, the largest African-American-owned business in the United States of America. As chairman, Mr. Stewart drives Worldwide Technology's major growth and strategic initiatives. Worldwide Technology, founded in 1990, is headquartered in Maryland Heights, Missouri, and grew from a small product reseller into a global systems integrator with nearly $7 billion in annual revenue. Worldwide Technology serves the technology needs of large public and private organizations globally, including the federal government. Since founding Worldwide Technology Incorporated in 1990, he has acquired a long list of public acknowledgments. He said he could never have imagined the life he shares with his wife of nearly 39 years and 2 adult children. There is no way any of this success could have ever been possible without her, he said. Marrying her was the best contract I ever signed.
I would love when people say I can't do something or it's not possible. Well, those are really very, very encouraging words for me. I grew up in Clinton, Missouri, milking cows and slopping hogs. We wouldn't have an indoor bathroom as well, so part of my responsibilities also was taking out the chamber pot. I had a mother and father that were caring, that were committed to that next generation. And as I began to think about what does the future hold, I wanted to be a part of the technological revolution that was going on, because I knew that if I could be a part of that, I could be a part of reshaping, redefining business and the way people did business.
In your book, you talk about integrity. That's something how do you lead your company, Worldwide Technology, in integrity in a godly perspective?
You lead by example. Everything that you do is based on a set of principles around integrity and reputation. We got to protect the brand, and everybody has a responsibility to that. And so, you know, if you don't have that in this business and working here, you see it placarded everywhere around Worldwide, reminding people of the set of core values, and integrity is part of that.
How did you figure out that you wanted to be in business?
You have many influences around you, you know, that you say, but I would say for you, which I didn't realize how significant it was, and the Word of God itself will help encourage, and you can find yourself, you know, being immersed into that. You begin to be encouraged, not only encouraged, but also it helps you create a vision for what's possible as well.
Mr. Stewart, we have one final question. It comes from the student who, at this particular point, has the highest average score in the oratory contest. Her name is Ruby Johnson, and so Ruby has the final question.
Hi, Mr. Stewart. I'm Ruby Johnson, and I just want to say, through reading your book, I actually realized what I want to do with my company. So thank you for that. And what advice do you have for an owner of a small startup company?
Have faith. Faith is something things hoped for and everything's not seen. You've done something that many will never do, and that's have the faith that it's possible, and looking beyond your circumstances, and it takes courage to do that, right?
Hello, thank you for taking a few minutes to learn more about Worldwide Technology, our expansive capabilities, and powerful strategic partnerships. Worldwide specializes in delivering and supporting advanced technology solutions in the areas of data center and virtualization, mobility and borderless networks, unified communications, and security. We bring a new way of thinking and a proven approach to how organizations evaluate, architect, and implement technology. Through our Advanced Technology Center, we provide our customers with expert technical and engineering resources and hands-on access to the latest technology products and solutions from industry-leading OEMs and more than 3,000 manufacturers around the world. Our high-end, high-touch ATC is staffed with highly skilled IT professionals and configured with the latest technology for live and remote product demonstrations, technology trainings, proof of concept testing, and hands-on workshops so you can experience the power of cutting-edge solutions firsthand. Worldwide also offers a complete array of configuration and integration services, along with a full suite of advanced logistics, inventory management, and supply chain solutions. We are ISO 9001 certified and recognize the vital importance of security and compliance across the supply chain. With more than 22,000 square feet of secure integration space and the capacity to simultaneously configure and integrate more than 35,000 systems per week, our Integration Technology Center reduces the risk, costs, and complexity of IT deployments. Contact us today to learn more.
Operated by more than 200 material and logistics team members, Worldwide Technology's Lakeview Technology Center processes nearly 20% of the company's total annual revenue. With more than 2 million square feet of space around the world, our teams receive and ship hundreds of thousands of products each year from hundreds of manufacturers. By leveraging our advanced material planning processes, our customers experience reduced product lead time, increased delivery predictability, and accelerated benefits of the technology being implemented. In our state-of-the-art integration lab, WWT engineers work with our customers to build network, storage, and compute solutions. Within the integration lab, our engineers are providing end-to-end services including device mounting, custom cabling and labeling, testing, configuration, and shipping. Our proven systematic approach has resulted in reduced cost of implementations for our customers by as much as 30% through labor optimization and build consistency, as well as reduced on-site downtimes associated with DOE equipment. This ability to scale gives our customers the flexibility to mitigate against these traditional delays. Worldwide Technology's Proof of Concept Test Lab offers our customers the opportunity to collaborate with our engineers, designing and testing innovative custom solutions. Using VPN access with streaming video, customers have real-time observation capabilities and hands-on access during the integration process, allowing remote configuration, testing, and evaluation prior to on-site delivery. Through a combination of inventory planning, supply chain management, and our rack integration solutions, customers have been able to accelerate technology implementations by as much as 50%, resulting in faster revenue generation and overall realization of savings.
I'm here today to do something that I really enjoy doing, which is recognizing outstanding businesses, outstanding individuals that we have here in the greater Detroit area. Congratulations.
We got a chance to catch up with Ron Hall Jr. to find out what Bridgewater Interiors was up to get this award.
So the company is 16 years old. We've been in operations for 15 years, beginning at this facility. The Detroit facility is the original plant, is the headquarters building, and presently here we produce seating systems for 2 General Motors programs and 1 Ford Motor Company program. The company is black-owned. We're one of the largest African-American-owned companies in the country. We're very proud of that.
Here's a 1992 Detroit Black Journal interview with the late Don Barden about being a business owner.
So now, when did you professionally decide I'm going to go into business for myself, and how did that whole thing come about?
I would say it started during the summers, the summer right after high school. I worked in a machine shop and was paid $50 a week. My hands were greasy and dirty, and I decided that I did not want to work with my muscles, with my hands, with my body, but more with my mind. And so therefore I went off to college after high school and decided that I did not want to be the guy in the machine shop rebuilding starters and generators and that sort of thing. I wanted to be the owner of the business at the front counter, taking the money in and having people work for me, doing the hard work, if you will.
Don Hamilton Barden was the only African-American owner of a national gambling company in the United States. The son of auto workers and the great-grandson of a freed slave, Mr. Barden rose from poverty to become owner of one of America's largest black-owned businesses, with casinos, automobile sales, music, and cable television. Mr. Barden began his business empire at the age of 21 with $500 in savings, opening a record store in Lorain, Ohio. Later, he founded Barden Cablevision, a cable television franchise that became the only cable system serving Detroit and its suburbs. In 1995, he sold his Detroit cable franchise to Comcast for $100 million, making it possible for him to open his Majestic Star, a riverboat casino in Gary, Indiana. Mr. Barton grew his riverboat casino into the Majestic Star Casino Company, which operated casinos in Indiana, Colorado, Mississippi, and Nevada. In 2000, he became the first black owner of a Las Vegas casino with his purchase of Fitzgerald's, eventually selling that business to Comcast for more than $100 million. In 2010, the magazine Black Enterprise ranked Mr. Barton's company as the 10th highest grossing black-owned company in the nation, with annual revenues of over $400 million.
African American imprint in the world of technology takes center stage at the Black Enterprise inaugural Tech Connects Summit. I'm Michael Reel, and this is ReelRenews.com. We are in Silicon Valley. We speak with President and CEO of Black Enterprise Magazine.
Is a significant African American imprint in technology in Silicon Valley. How significant is that?
So significant that they did an article, I guess, on some show that said there were no African American businesses in Silicon Valley. And that's kind of the impression that most people around the country have. But that's not true.
I work at Rocket Fuel. We are a tech company here in Silicon Valley, and I run the philanthropy program. I've been with Rocket Fuel for 6 years, and I'm a black woman in tech, and we do exist. We're looking for more.
You are a veteran of Silicon Valley.
Yes. Well, I'm a veteran as we call it, but we keep saying we're transplants. But I've been here for 27 years.
Sure.
And I worked in high tech for 15 years. I've been involved in nonprofits for about the last 6 or 7 years. And we have a great project talking about STEM where we are on the road to develop a Black History Museum in Silicon Valley, with STEM being one of the key sources of it. Because we are here and we're doing things, but we got to keep on doing it, letting folks know what we're doing.
We're just excited that Black Enterprise is here, setting roots here in Silicon Valley, and helping us spread the word of getting these children educated in STEM, and also blacks in tech. It is, we just got to spread the word. Blacks are here in tech, and we want more.
So that's
Come to Silicon Valley.
So that's the slogan. Yeah. Blacks in tech.
Blacks in tech.
Well, for me, it's
blacks in tech.
Blacks in business.
Yes.
Blacks in tech.
Yes.
Blacks in business.
Yes.
How y'all doing? This is Chief X, and I'm here at, what's the name of your store, young lady?
Grocery Outlet.
The Grocery Outlet. And this lady's name is Kia. She owns this full-blown grocery store in Compton, California. Do you guys hear me? There's not a black-owned grocery store in the whole state of California. And this young lady, Kia, owns this grocery store. Hi, Kia. Now,
Hey, Chief.
tell the people how long you've had this store.
I've only been here for 2 months, actually.
2 months.
Yeah, it hasn't been too long.
And you bought it from?
An Oriental company.
An Oriental couple. She bought this grocery store from an Oriental couple. So I made a post earlier letting these people know that we can do what we want to do.
Absolutely.
Right? It's no one stopping us.
Absolutely. And
Okay.
my family works here with me, so.
Okay.
Yes.
There we go. Grocery Outlet. This black woman bought this grocery store from Asians.
Now, so that gives you the effect of the minimum wage law. It tends to discriminate against the employment of low-skilled workers. Now, if you're an employer and you could pay the guy $4 an hour what he's worth, then you would hire him, and then the benefit to that low-skilled worker is that he would have a job in the first place. And having a job in the first place means that you're able to gain skills that will make you a more valuable worker in the future. And that's how most of us move up the economic ladder. We get on-the-job training. That is, we start out not very skilled at all, and we get a job, and then we improve ourselves and get a higher wages. And the dramatic example of that is intern. What is an intern? An intern is a low-skilled doctor, and so he has to do all kinds of drudge work at the hospital, and he's on the job. He has a job. He's gaining experience. He's learning from others, and ultimately becomes a doctor, and he earns a higher wage. Now, if you look at so far as the black teenage unemployment, and in my book, Race and Economics, that I wrote a few years ago, in 1948, black teenage unemployment was 9.4%. White teenage unemployment was 10.2%. Black teenagers were more active in the labor market than were whites. Well, how can you explain that? Well, you can't say, well, in 1948, maybe there was less racial discrimination. That's why blacks had higher employment rates. What about saying that, well, blacks had higher skills than whites? Well, that doesn't cut it as well. What does explain it is increases in the minimum wage law that we saw take off since 1960s. It's priced young people out of the market. And I might say that the little bit of money that a teenager can earn by having weekend and after school or summer jobs, the little bit of money that he can earn is not nearly as important as the other things that he can learn from early work experiences. And these are beneficial for all kids, but particularly for black kids. That is, if you have early work experiences, number one, you have an opportunity to make labor market mistakes before you have people dependent on you. And then you learn things like, well, you got to come to work Friday even though you got paid Thursday. You have to respect your supervisor. You have to develop a good work attitude. You have to carry yourself correctly. And then there's the financial semi-independence from early work experiences that contributes to a person's sense of pride and self-esteem and self-worth. And when you have a minimum wage law, that it nixes out those opportunities, and those early work opportunities, the benefits of early work opportunities are even more important for kids who come from broken homes, go to rotten schools, live in dysfunctional neighborhoods. And so if that kid is going to learn anything that will make him a more valuable employee in the future, he has to get it through on the job, because he's not going to learn in school, he's not going to learn at home, he's not going to learn in his neighborhood. So it's devastating. And many of the problems that we see among blacks today is entirely new in black history. For example, I think somewhere between 30 and 40% of black kids live in single-parent families. That is, the majority of black kids live in single-parent households. Well, it turns out in the 1880s, 70-some% of blacks lived in two-parent families. In 1925 New York, 85% of black kids lived in two-parent families. So again, the broken black family is entirely new. Matter of fact, it's probably incorrect to call it a broken family. Families don't form in the first place. The illegitimacy rate among blacks is around 75%, just close to 75%. That too is entirely new. In 1940, the illegitimacy rate among blacks was 14%. When Patrick Moynihan was writing about it in 1965, it was 25%, and by 1980 it was 56%, and it just continued growing to what it is today. And so this
apprenticeships place students into great jobs without the crippling debt of traditional four-year college degrees. Instead, apprentices earn while they learn, which is an expression we're using, earn while you learn. So we're empowering these companies, these unions, industry groups, federal agencies to go out and create new apprenticeships for millions of our citizens.
Trying to get the word out here. We're in DeSoto, Texas today. Playing on a little tin mat here. Got other activity over here.
Don't miss.
I'm about to get hit by a car, but that's all right. I died playing the game of cans. K104 is here in Dallas, Fort Worth area.
South of Dallas and west of I-35, 51,000 live among the large homes and rolling hills of DeSoto. That's something very familiar to DeSoto Mayor Carl Sherman.
Since 2000 to 2010, there has been a large migration of African Americans to North Texas, and many of those have chosen to live in the city of DeSoto.
The U.S. Census says 68% of people in DeSoto are black, compared with 25% in Dallas and 19% in Fort Worth. The median household income is $60,000, higher than the state average and the city of Dallas.
Citizens literally get out of the car and they take pride in their community. They pick up the trash along with our employees.
Despite the positives, the mayor says some real estate agents steer potential white residents away from DeSoto.
They were shown some of our nice, pristine communities, well-manicured yards, and the realtor would say, "Are you sure you want to live here?"
We have a beautiful community, and there is so much opportunity here.
African Americans also run 55% of businesses in DeSoto. Tochi Osugi moved her spa here a year ago.
I wanted a little young black girl that wanted to go to a spa to see one in their neighborhood and know that that's possible.
And frustration from dozens of Clayton County parents who say their children are going hungry tonight after their food stamps were suddenly cut off. Fox 5's Justin Gray is at the live desk with the story that is all new tonight on The Edge. Justin.
Tom, state officials admit to me tonight that something went wrong down in Clayton County at the office that administers food stamps and Medicaid, but they're still not sure what. Parents tell me tonight they can't buy food without those food stamps.
This food stamp card ain't got number 17 cents on it.
Terry Clark says she stood in line for more than 6 hours at Clayton County's Human Services office because food stamp help for her 6 children unexpectedly ended.
There's no telling my kids that we can't eat. I'm not taking no, because my babies don't deserve that. Nobody kids should go hungry down here in Georgia.
State officials say this office was overwhelmed today, with dozens of families facing a similar problem. The food stamps just not there.
Me and my kids, they haven't ate since this morning. And I was supposed to get my food stamps yesterday and I didn't get nothing.
So they was getting angry. They started banging on the window.
A state spokesperson tells me what happened here today was out of the ordinary and it was unexpected, but they say they're not sure what exactly went wrong, what was the glitch that led to this mess.
Our budgets have not increased. They've been actually decreased.
This director admitted to me there were problems here as he tried to calm fears. And his statement as state spokesperson says, quote, "We have both state and county staff working to understand the cause of the problem today. We are working to ensure people receive their food stamps as soon as possible."
I'm a cancer patient. I need these pills to survive. Okay?
Candace Bennett says her cancer medications have nearly run out, and after spending all day here, her Medicaid and her food stamps are both still on hold.
When are y'all gonna come through? When you gonna come through? When I'm on my last pill? Or better yet, when I'm dead? And then I won't need it.
State officials say that Clayton County office was closed Monday because of furloughs, and that could have contributed to the lines. They are investigating whether some sort of paperwork or computer problem might have led to some families getting their benefits cut off by mistake. Reporting at the live desk tonight, Justin Gray, Fox 5 News.
All right, Justin, thanks.
Detroit teachers are protesting today against the rollback demands of the Detroit School Board and its financial czar, Robert Bobb. Teachers are opposing demands for concessions in health benefits as well as wages.
They're offering us nothing. They want to give us a 10% cut in our wages. They want to give us a 20% hike in our medical insurance. They want to remove all of our sick days. You know, it's like you're taking so much from us, and we're here to educate the children. That's what we're here for, but you can't do it when you're taking everything from us. And we still have to live. We still have families. We still have to eat.
The Obama administration has been using the question of economic stimulus package money to say to school districts like Detroit, you must implement more charter schools, you must open the door for things like merit pay, otherwise you won't get any stimulus money. What do you think of that?
I think that he's trying to hold us hostage, and he's extorting us. There is no proof whatsoever that charter schools will improve the education of our children in any way. And also, it's just a corporate takeover of charter schools. They're always looking for more ways to make money, and they see the billions that are going into education, and they've decided that that's the way. So they create a crisis in education and come in and take the money that school systems normally get, that the public school system normally gets. So he's basically trying to blackmail the public school systems into accepting these corporate-owned schools.
The people here did not do this. We have came to work like they have asked us and work and did our best to teach these students. So it's not right.
All we have are each other, the working class. Our resources have been moved upward for years. And the elites, they stick together. They've bought the government. They have each other. All we have, once we realize that all we have are each other, we'll start to stick together better. So we have to stick together and fight for the things that we believe in also, for our working class.
That's really what it's about, getting rid of the middle class. You're going to have the rich and you're going to have the poor. We're going to be like a third world country, period. Just period. That's my belief.
The teachers had no part in this crisis or this deficit. This is a deficit that was caused by corporations, big business, the financial institutions of our country. The teachers had nothing to do with what's going on. The teachers had nothing to do with it. The state workers had nothing to do with it. The city workers had nothing to do with it. None of us had nothing to do with it, but we're all paying the price. And we're all being told that there's nothing for you, but there's always something for the financial elites in this country. And there's never anything for us. They're using our tax money, and to add insult to injury, they tell us that, okay, you're going to bail them out. We're going to use your tax dollars. We have nothing for you. The tax dollars that you paid, none of it will go towards anything that benefits you, and you'll have to pay it back. I mean, and if the banks come to them again and say we need another $1 trillion, we know that our government will be there to back Wall Street and the financial institutions, and there'll still be nothing for the people, for the working class.
I've been negotiating contracts on the DFT bargaining team since 1994. The only time that we had any concessions was in 2005, and we got most of them back in 2006, 7, and 8. So we don't have a history of granting concessions.
5,000 teachers at least have lost their jobs since 1999.
And that's not a concession? 5,000 teachers losing their job is not a concession. Okay.
It is one of the most essential elements of life. Americans enjoy some of the cleanest and most abundant water in the world. But what happens when the pipes are turned off and the tap runs dry?
How am I supposed to wash my child? How am I supposed to shower myself?
In the largest American city to ever file for bankruptcy, residents are falling behind on their water bills. Now, facing $5 billion in bad debt, the water department is taking drastic measures to plug holes, and that means cutting water. With poverty in the city hovering at 40% and an 8% unemployment rate, that is no easy task.
We have donations of water that people have sent. We also have water filtration devices as well as aqua tablets so that people could, get access to clean drinking water.
These groups are now calling for help from the federal government and even the United Nations to address what they describe as a humanitarian crisis. Nikita Rowley is one Detroit resident who is afraid of the consequences of missing even a single payment.
If you tell someone, I don't have water in my home, that's the first strike. You can get your children removed. Who do you go to? The water department and say, help get my children back? They don't care.
That fear isn't completely unfounded. The Michigan Welfare Rights Organization says that Child Protective Services will come into the home if water is not running.
Are you afraid that if your bills keep going up, if they cannot seem to resolve this problem with the payments, that your daughter could possibly be removed?
I am.
No justice, no peace.
And she isn't alone.
No peace.
You're shutting off water on the most vulnerable first, which now raises a human rights question. It raises a moral question. What do people do once their water's cut off? How do they take their medicine if they're seniors? How do they make the formula for the babies?
However, the water department argues
we have the burden of having to be realistic, and a lot of the folks, the activists, for example, don't have that burden. They have what they feel are simple solutions, which really don't really hold water. If anybody can come up with a way that we can make the Detroit drinking water as good as it is right now, for pennies on the dollar, we're willing to listen. Unfortunately, that's just not the case.
The city of Detroit recently announced an $800,000 plan to help struggling residents. But with water prices set to increase another 8.7% in July, that money is really just a drop in the bucket.
The people of Detroit are resilient. They're strong. They can take a lot. But I'm telling you, the breaking point is coming.
Leaving some residents salivating for a solution to this water crisis and others just plain thirsty. Reporting in Detroit, Michigan, Megan Lopez, RT.
Boyce said one statement that I just wanted to totally debunk, which is, for black people, we're the richest kids who's the poorest kids in a rich neighborhood. I mean, he never uses data, and like, you should question anybody that just tells you stuff.
See, we have systems to help our poor. Our poorest people in the United States are some of the richest people in the world. Because 50% of the world lives on $1 a day. 50% of the world makes $365 a year. So our poorest person gets Section 8. I have an actual client, okay, or tenant, if I can use that word, that stays in one of my properties, okay? The rent on that property is $1,300 a month. She only has to give me $110. That's it. And she has a 3-bedroom house. So we have systems to help the poor. Section 8, food stamps, all types of subsidies. Their kids get to go to college basically for free because tax dollars pay for those people.
Black America right now is the 9th richest nation on earth. We got approximately $380 billion worth of disposable income. We're richer than Sweden, Australia, Canada, Pakistan, India, and all the black African countries put together. But we're the poorest nation on earth because we violate every principle of economics. Your money is supposed to stay inside your community and bounce 8 to 12 times before it leaves. Black money does not bounce one time. You know why it doesn't bounce one time? Because you don't have any communities to bounce it in. You're so busy integrating. Where are you going to bounce it? How are you going to pass it through another black hand? So as soon as a black person gets paid, before it touches another black hand, he runs right to the suburbs and spends it. He spends 95% of his money immediately outside his own community. He keeps 5% to take back into his community. Out of 5% he takes back into his community, he spends 3% of that in non-black owned hands in his own communities. Look around your neighborhood, goes into non-black owned businesses. Only 2% again, only 2% of all the black people in America keep their own money in their own communities. And then out of the 2% they keep, They then take that down to a white bank and put it in the bank, can't even get a loan. And now you're bankrupt. You go bankrupt every 24 hours, this is regular clock, and whites don't take you serious. They know that anybody who goes bankrupt every 24 hours should not be taken seriously. You started raising Cain outside their store, they say, hey, wait a minute. It's 3 o'clock. Wait for those blacks. They'll go bankrupt in about another 3 hours. They know you're gonna violate all the rules. So the reason we don't have any black businesses in America is for 3 reasons. 1, we've never had a national plan to start building black businesses in the country. That's why I wrote my book. That's why you got a plan now. 2 is that whites and other groups are boycotting your neighborhoods. They're boycotting you. And 3, we're boycotting our own neighborhoods and our own stores.
I did a piece called Rise of Legacy. You can check that out. And I talked about this. This is where we're at now. It matters that you came from a slave. It matters that you came from Jim Crow. And if you want to make it not matter, you have to demand more of government, and you have to force white people to come off all of the Scrooge McDuck wealth that they're swimming in. What I provide as a solution, and I'm going to be doing a paper with Darity kind of around this concept, is first and foremost, we have to demand that white America gives up the advantages of whiteness.
Before we go on to the next section, let's just say one other thing. Regardless of what you think about Boyce, what he's using is do the best you can from where you are. That's a conservative ideology. That's what Republicans tell us all the time. You do the best with where you are. You're lucky to be in America. They'll even tell us you're lucky that you were taken away from Africa. Do the best you can in America with what you have. That is the exact same thing that Boyce is saying. My problem is that if you said that, if a conservative said that, if Donald Trump said that, y'all will be living. There's a great article by Ta-Nehisi Coates about reparations that talks about everything that was stolen from us. So how can we talk about where we are and what we have to do by not talking without really focusing and honing in on what was stolen from us and how to get it back? What's the process for getting it back? What's the politics for getting it back? Because politics is going to get it back. You doing for self is not going to get it back. We have to get it back through politics and policy. That's how that happens. You're not going to get it back by starting a black business.
And you're not going to get it back through labor. And you're not going to get it back through labor. I mean, this it's so.
African American women spend billions every year on black hair products. Even though they only make up 10% of the American population, they buy 70% of all wigs and extensions purchased here in the United States. But with that huge market, who controls it? Where does the money end up? Where do the billions go? I decided to try to find out here at the Black Hair Extravaganza. Follow the money.
Apply the thermal straightening ball. Section the hair into...
We think the African American style is a very big business.
Well, one, I was very happy, well, I'm always very happy when I hear you all keep returning to that point, that the problem here is a political one. It's not about individual, behavior. This is not about, what decisions we're making, is when we get up in the morning. This is about the absence of political power and not recognizing, Kwame Ture used to just simply, I know he was kind of joking for organizational purposes, but one of the jokes he used to tell was, that we should run for local office, assume political power, so that we could raise the tax base of the people paying home ownership taxes. And since we don't own homes, we'll just be living off of them. And then he would also just say, if you want to end poverty, give poor people money. It's just that simple. If you want to end poverty, give poor people money. It's just that simple.
In the 2000 census, the United States government declared Detroit to be the poorest city in the United States with the highest crime rate. And everybody's sitting back in the black leadership saying, oh, why are we so poor? You're poor because you're stuck on stupid. And everybody's sitting back in the black leadership saying, oh, why are we so poor? You're poor because you're stuck on stupid. You're poor because you're stuck on stupid. There is a direct relationship in this country between how many businesses you own and how poor you're going to be as a group. Those groups that have no businesses are going to be poor and imprisoned. It is not the government's responsibility to help you do anything. The government's responsibility and the police department's responsibility is to put you in jail and keep you out of the way. And nobody was concerned and understand that if you don't have any businesses, you're going to be poor. The reason black people are the poorest people in the United States is because we don't own businesses.
If you have that book by Malcolm Gladwell, go get it, because we're going to use it as a teaching tool today during this conversation. So if you have it, go and get it.
Come now, children,
evening,
gather
Monica
around.
Sims Wimbush. Good evening, Sandra. Good evening, Mark. Hey, Don. And, let's just get to it. So those of you who follow me on Facebook, who are paying attention, know that, or have an idea, or if you don't necessarily follow me on Facebook, just go to a post I had, I think it was yesterday or the day before, and it was a post about Elon Musk of Tesla fame. It was a post about him, and the post was from CNBC, and it had 8 books that taught Elon Musk basically how to be a billionaire. It was very interesting in a lot of ways, but most interesting, the way it was most interesting in terms of my thinking was how Elon Musk and other billionaires and multimillionaires have sort of gotten away with framing the conversation for everybody else, and how they frame the thinking for everybody else. So everybody believes that that's how you get to be a billionaire. You read these kinds of books and you put in that kind of work, and that's how you get to be a billionaire. Except that it's not that simple. Except that that's not the way that it works. And that's very important. This is a very important thing. This is a very important issue. So people say, well, what do you mean? What are you saying about Elon Musk? Well, here's what I'm saying. And I want to say that context, what I'm trying to say is that context matters. And there are a lot of things that are your context in life. Your family. Who is your mother? Who is your father? Who is your grandfather? Who is your grandmother? Who and what kind of situation do they put you in your life? What kind of community are you being raised in your life? Who are the people around you in your life? How much money do these people have? How much expertise do these people have? And how are they able to give that to you? How are they able to pass that down to you in a way that creates opportunities for you in your own life?
You mean you can't just read the magic books? But what
These
about
are magic books like magic beans.
like it's like Jack and so what you're telling me, the camera's on me now. So what you're telling me is that these magic books don't work like Jack and the Beanstalk's magic beans. But if I can just sell my cow and take these beans, then I'll be rich,
right?
How I
know? You know how I know it don't work like magic beans?
How do you know?
Because you're not rich.
Oh.
Army has read more books than most people I know. His bookshelf is extensive.
I've read a lot of books.
He's not Elon Musk.
I'm not Elon Musk.
Okay? He's very high IQ, very smart guy. You ever read Iron Man, right? Very, very smart. Not Elon Musk. Because and that's what this tells you. What people and you people, I had somebody on my page say something to the extent of, well, you know, Elon Musk, he was homeless at one point and he didn't have a lot. And I don't know what you're talking about, Yvette, because you read books. Yes, but we're not talking about whether or not I read books. We're talking about the correlation between reading and wealth. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about the correlation between reading and knowledge, the correlation between reading and money. Okay? Elon Musk did not get rich because he read books. He got rich because of a lot of things. One of those things was, from what I read, and I didn't even know the man was apparently born in South Africa. Do you know what that means? That means that all of the people who were natives in South Africa, the native South Africans, the black people, these people are off the board. Okay, so you don't understand exactly what that means? Well, here's the best way to give you an analogy. Imagine being born in America as an African-American person, but you don't have to compete with white people. Like, all the white people are like slaves. They're peons, and you ain't got to compete with them. That's kind of what, that's the environment that he came up in. Then he had like an electrical engineer, or no, I think it was a mechanical engineer as a father, a model as a mother. His aunt was like one of the first chiropractors to do something. You know, the best way to get wealthy isn't to read books, is to come from wealth and have people that can put you into those situations.
As for the last conspiracy theory, elite families passing their wealth from generation to generation, evidence suggests that it is the exception rather than the rule. Certainly, one can point to the DuPonts or the Kennedys or the Rockefellers having successfully accomplished this. But, a number of surveys of wealthy families have consistently found that only about 5% of wealthy families' assets were inherited. The vast majority, approximately 70%, was created in the current generation via business ownership. The remaining 25% of wealth was the result of high-income occupations, such as doctors, attorneys, etc. How can this be? The numbers also show that roughly 1 in 3 businesses pass to the next generation. Just about 10% of family businesses pass to the grandchildren's generation. Still fewer make it to the subsequent generation. Regardless of the reasons, family money seems to move away from that which created it. Among wealth advisors, there is a saying, the first generation makes it, the second generation spends it, and the third generation blows it.
Okay, that's the best way to happen. You know, you look at it.
Are you telling me? Are you telling me that I could be a high school dropout, but if I'm white and I come from like wealth,
yeah,
I'll do okay?
You do fine.
You'll do
there's a greater possibility because you look like rich people. Because they don't. There's no way to tell that like you're not a rich person.
Right.
So you look like rich people.
I can get the contract.
You have a shot at it. You have a shot, and especially depending on where you were born at and what you were born into. Right. That's how context matters. And even when you look at Zuckerberg, there's a very good, I think it's clip number 2. There's a very good story about when you talk about the context in which people grow up in. Zuckerberg, his father gave him a loan. Like, these people are able to, and Elon Musk got a loan too. So you're looking at people, I think Elon Musk's loan was like $20,000, which is like $40,000 to today's term. How many of you have a parent who can give you $40,000? Now, the reason I'm going to dig deep into this is what I realized.
No, that's not, let's be honest.
Yeah,
to lose. It's not just $40,000
to lose.
To lose.
$40,000, and they'll be like, it's okay. We'll try again next time.
Yes.
Yeah, fail up, whatever they say. Keep failing, you'll be all right, whatever they say. But the reason I want to drill down on this, the reason I really want to drill down, because a lot of you have been kind of saying, like, Yvette, you mention this a lot when you talk about stuff, but you never go into it. You always mention how, like, wealth is about context or wealth is about whatever, and you never really drill it down. So I wanted to take this kind of show and drill it down. I never drill it down. That's what you say to me. So I'm going to take this show and I'm going to drill it down and show you what it is and try to bring that, into context. These people were made by capital, but it wasn't just capital. It was something else. You say, well, what was it? It was a lot of things. But first of all, you have to understand, when you look at the context of people's lives, you look at Zuckerberg getting that money. You look at Elon Musk getting that money and being born in South Africa. And these people who are all white being born in America, where descendants of slaves were basically handcuffed during the period where people were making money. When you look at that, one of the other things that you see, if you can look at life in that context, you see that Obama came from white people. That's where he came from. Obama came from white people. He may as well, people say, I'm not saying he's not black, but he may as well be white because he was built on whiteness. His father helped him get into the private school, Punahou. We discussed that before. All of the people who made that next step possible, with the exception of Chicago and Jesse Jackson, these are white people. They got his school. These are white. So when you look at the context, you understand why his context is not our context.
Born Michelle LaVaughn Robinson on January 17, 1964 in Chicago, Michelle Obama was raised in a blue-collar home on Chicago's South Side. She went to Princeton University in 1981 and then on to law school after her college graduation.
After she graduated from Harvard Law School in 1988, Michelle Obama moved back to her hometown of Chicago, where she began working at a law firm.
Michelle Obama left corporate law to work in the public sector in 1991. She briefly worked as assistant to Chicago Mayor Richard Daley, and later started a nonprofit to help train people for careers in public service. She became an associate dean at the University of Chicago in 1996, and then a vice president at the University Medical Center in 2005.
Pre-1960, most African Americans were Republicans. After Martin Luther King was freed from jail by John F. Kennedy, the African American vote has gone Democratic. What exactly did we get exchanged for our 95% Democratic swaying vote? We gave up 3-to-1 odds in abortion.
14 million black babies have died since 1973.
Dependent on welfare systems.
They begin to take young women and they begin to tell the young women, well, we will give you money, you just stay home. But what if I want to get married? You lose your benefits.
When you remove the black man out of the house, the likelihood of the young black men going to jail increases by 60%. This is what this party has given on a platter to African Americans. Sometimes you can't tell the difference between now and 200 years ago. And we, by 95%, support this.
What broke down in black America is just a picture of what's breaking down in the rest of society.
The slippery slope of leftist progressivism that is taking place in America today.
What the liberal Democrats have in mind is to have the government become our God through entitlement programs that shackles people to a system of being dependent.
Statism, government in our homes telling us what to do, when, where, and how.
Playing the race card, playing the class warfare card. They want people to stay on that Democrat plantation mindlessly
You hear the rhetoric that these programs are based on what our ancestors went through. Not only has big government enslaved America's poor, but now we're looking at the extension of government into all communities.
People are still mentally enslaved. We tell them, hey, you can be free.
Some of the criticism I keep getting from people is that, Yvette, you're telling us to sit around and wait for white people. That's what you're doing. And what you're telling me is that you don't understand government. I'm not telling you to sit around and wait for white people. I'm telling you to get involved with your government and get some courage in your heart and do what our ancestors did and fight for your place. Because let me tell you something. You keep saying, I keep hearing people saying, I ain't waiting for the white man. Listen, you pay taxes. I pay taxes. We all pay taxes. Payroll, gas, federal, property. I say it again. Payroll, gas, federal. Those are just some of the taxes that we pay. What I'm telling you is that the money that we spend should be directed to address the needs of our community. How is the money that we spend in taxes being redirected to address the needs of our community? How is that? Please tell me how that's asking for a handout. You're asking for your own money to be spent to help you and your kids and your family. That's not a handout. That's our own money. But see, what's happening right now is that they're taking our money and they're spending it for everything else. It's ignorant. You don't understand math. How does a finance professor not understand math? I'm going to get to Dr. Boyce Watkins real hard in 1 second. But let me just say this. You also don't understand history. Put up that first clip. You put up an interview clip and then put the next clip. History is very important. You have to understand history to understand that there's a black radical tradition in this country of challenging the government. Even Malcolm X said, listen, I wanted Martin to be successful. That's kind of why I'm here. I wanted Martin to be successful. There was this whole thing, here versus there, this one versus this one. That's what it was. That's how you get to freedom. You don't get to freedom saying, you know what, everybody else deserves everything, and I don't deserve nothing. This money that I pay in through taxes, I don't want none of it back. Give it all back to the white people. That's what makes you a punk. When you give all your tax money away and you say, you know what, I don't want none of it back. Give it to the white people. I'm going to do everything for myself. What? We got robbed for 400 years? And you don't want any of that back, and then you don't even want none of the stuff that we pay for back. You don't want even none of that we pay for back. See, this stuff right here, this is a problem. These kind of conversations right here, these conversations are a problem. And Dr. Jerry Ball just explained to you why they're a problem. You got to do enough research to understand why this is BS. Dr. Ball just explained to us this was created by Nielsen marketing. It is not anchored to wealth. It's not anchored to anything. So why are you still saying it?
Why are you still saying it? It's irresponsible.
Oh, pull up that Maven. But why are you still saying it? It's irresponsible to tell us that we're the problem. That we're the problem. So I'm asking myself, why are you still saying it? I want to tell you about what good black politics looks like. What good black politics looks like. It looks like this man who just passed away recently, Chokwe Lumumba. That's what it looks like. Do you know what he did? Do you know what he did? He became mayor of Jackson, Mississippi. Ain't no place in America more racist than that. And he started redistributing wealth in terms of contracts from all these white people who were getting all the wealth to some black contractors, black co-ops, all of that stuff. That's what Chokwe Lumumba did. He was a revolutionary leader. That's who he was. And now that he's passed away, his son has taken over as the leader of that that city, Jackson, Mississippi. We need to understand, and I mean, you can go to clip number 2. Go to clip number 2, Iron. There's another clip when you talk about black politics and how black politics can't work. And some of you people are crazy. Some of you people are telling me that even though I got Chocolate Lumumba in my history, and he came through Jackson, and now his son is there, and they're doing stuff for black people, you're telling me that that don't work. Okay, let me tell you something. It's not just that. There's a great article the Army's about to put up about people in Louisiana. There were some people in Louisiana who were about to get evicted. Now let me read to you. They were about to get evicted. But guess what? There was a government program, and one of the people who was about to get evicted, who was a veteran with PTSD, went to this government legal aid program financed by the government and says, I want to try to do something about this. He said, I want to try to do something about this. And guess what happened? It says when Adams, that was his attorney named Miss Adams. When Adams began digging into
Everybody wants to be a part of our market because we're the #1 consumer. We spend 10 to 1 on anybody in here.
Even in China, the land of the low-paid factory worker, robots are quietly taking over from their human counterparts. China has now overtaken Japan for having more robots than anywhere else in the world. New technology has changed industries and society for hundreds of years, and we have adapted and moved on. And in a great number of cases, it's created more jobs than have been lost. Artificial intelligence may not be taking over tomorrow, but it is a creeping, inexorable change that will come as companies and governments strive for ever-increasing efficiencies in the face of competition and money saving. Right now, we are still a long way from this future, and there will still be many roles for which machines are not able to compete with humans. But the upheaval will be significant, and it is underway. It will be up to the individual to see how they best fit into this new future workplace.
Sophia is capable of natural facial expressions. She has cameras in her eyes and algorithms which allow her to see faces, so she can make eye contact with you. And she can also understand speech and remember the interactions, remember your face. So this will allow her to get smarter over time. Our goal is that she will be as conscious, creative, and capable as any human.
Educational inequality is probably more than anything else the fundamental root of broader inequality. If we look at inequality in access to particular careers, inequality in income and wealth, inequality in the nature of political participation, all those things are mitigated by equalizing the skills that education produces, not only the academic skills, but the dispositions, the frames of minds, the conscientiousness, the diligence, the sense of agency. And so I think there is nothing more important we could do to produce the type of society we want than to raise outcomes in the field of education, so that knowing somebody's race or ethnicity tells you nothing at all about what their test scores or grades or occupation might be. There's not just one challenge to face when we talk about achievement gaps. Even if we just talk about racial achievement gaps, we have students of color in high-income suburban districts that are lagging their white classmates. We have inner-city school districts that are high poverty have a difficult time attracting teachers. So the work that needs to happen is to figure out how in each of these contexts we can make the changes that are necessary to produce the excellence to which we aspire. If we can do that at some greater scale, it truly is plausible that we can have much less poverty in the next generations, and that we can have the society with regard to race that we want in the future.
It's not all about money.
I think it's a scapegoat. If we had more money, we could hire this or do this.
It's become fashionable to say, oh, it's a waste, it's a cesspool.
The problem is in what happened once the money got there.
Camden, I think people often forget how poor the city is. There's just a sense of hopelessness, that this is just a cycle that I'm stuck in. There's not many streets in Camden that you can drive down that you don't, how is this in New Jersey? How is this right next to a Collingswood or a Cherry Hill or a Haddonfield? You can go on one street and it looks like there are 14 houses and 12 are abandoned and closed up.
Camden, New Jersey is the poorest small city in America, but it's also a case study in how government programs have proven tragically ineffective at ameliorating poverty. State and federal taxpayers have spent hundreds of millions of dollars on various revitalization projects in Camden over the years, but the money never ended up where it was supposed to, and nothing changed. By far the largest initiative to combat poverty with government largesse has been directed at Camden's public schools. New Jersey spends about 60% more on public education per pupil than the national average, or about $19,000 in 2013. In Camden, per pupil spending was more than $25,000, making it one of the highest spending districts in the nation. And yet all that extra money hasn't changed the fact that Camden's schools are among the worst in the state, known for their abysmal test scores, high rates of in-school violence, dilapidated buildings, and high dropout rates. The story of how Camden became one of the nation's best funded and worst performing school districts begins in the early 1980s, when a small nonprofit called the Education Law Center filed a landmark lawsuit called Abbott v. Burke. At the time, poor cities in New Jersey like Camden were getting about 25% less funding for their schools than New Jersey's more affluent suburbs. Rutgers law professor Paul Trachtenberg was one of the legal architects of Abbott v. Burke.
So we had the winners and the losers, and typically the winners were white suburban students and the losers were the growing number of black students living in cities, and the disparities in what was spent on their education and in the quality of the school buildings and the school programs and the class size was dramatic.
It's not all about money.
Saul Cooperman was the state education commissioner under New Jersey Governor Tom Kean, and he fought Abbott v. Burke on the grounds that the school districts in cities like Camden were rife with mismanagement, waste, and corruption.
Schools were money pots. So it was patronage on a huge scale, and also contracts. You could set up corporations to go for contracts, you could subcontract that out. And though I saw some good people in urban schools, mostly I saw politicized problems at the top.
But Trachtenberg, along with Marilyn Morehouser, a former nun and civil rights activist, who litigated Abbott v. Burke, framed the issue in stark moral terms.
More and more of these kids are disadvantaged. How can you not give the kids money? They didn't want to go in and see what the exact problem was, and was it a money problem?
I don't want to make this ad hominem, but you've got in Tom Kean and Saul Cooperman, two white suburban guys who knew pretty much zero about urban education. We've created this kind of mythology, which is very handy for white suburbanites to say, well, we don't want to send money to those corrupt, inefficient, ineffective places.
Children of color are citizens just as fully as are their counterparts in wealthy suburbs.
There's no person I know who doesn't believe that Marilyn Morehouser was a saint. And there's no person I know who doesn't think that the goal of equalizing funding in the districts wasn't the right one to pursue. The problem is in what happened once the money got there.
Saul Cooperman's warnings would turn out to be prophetic. After the Abbott money started flowing out of Trenton in the late 1990s, the state launched an ambitious school construction program targeted at fixing the dilapidated school buildings in Camden and the other so-called Abbott districts.
And what we found was that less than half of the proposed schools got built, and $1 billion of the money got lost. The audits of the conditions afterwards were very clear. People were paying out their friends. The cost overruns were unbelievable.
They're the same things that still go on. Jobs and contracts. Jobs and contracts. That's money that doesn't go to kids.
Mismanagement and corruption also continued to weigh on the day-to-day operations in Camden and many of the other Abbott districts. A 2008 audit of Camden's district office found a chaotic management culture, a lack of standard accounting practices, and questionable use of state funds, such as $13 million spent over 2 years on travel expenses for school staffers to attend education conferences. The state Supreme Court also mandated that New Jersey fund universal preschool in Camden and the other Abbott districts.
So that thing has been good. I think the problem is that people sell pre-K as the answer to K-12 dysfunction. And if you don't fix K-12, you waste the gains of pre-K.
It's become fashionable to say, oh, it's a waste, it's a cesspool, it's money down the rat hole, all these not very complimentary phrases. But the state is the ultimately responsible actor for education. So that being the case, to the extent there are failures in the administration of schools, in the proper use of money, it's the state that's ultimately responsible. And that's undeniable as a matter of law.
It is easy to say that it is the state's responsibility because it just absolves every district of their complete and utter fiscal and educational failure for kids over the last 30 years.
A lack of resources is not a problem. I actually despise that argument. I think it's a scapegoat. We need more money. If we had more money, we could hire this or do this. It's just a Band-Aid to the problem. Why not address the real issue, which is what's broken right in front of you?
Bridget Cusado Rosa is the principal of Freedom Prep, one of 10 charter schools in Camden. Just as the Abbott money started to flow in the late 1990s, New Jersey's first charter schools began opening, and they've demonstrated that it's possible to do an effective job of educating kids from poor backgrounds with significantly less money. Charters get about 70% of the funding per pupil as traditional public schools, but they're also more insulated from the corrupting influence of politics. For one thing, they have to pay for their school buildings out of their own budgets. Freedom Prep is located on the 5th floor of a hospital.
You find a way to make it work. You cut out things that are incidentals, that don't matter in pushing a child to college. If you put the focus on your teachers and your scholars' education, everything else you can figure out.
Is money important? Yes, the teachers must be well paid, or you can't recruit teachers to work in Camden or Jersey City or Elizabeth. But if you're paying the teachers well, and I submit you look at urban salaries and they are paid very, very well, as are the principals and superintendents. So that's not a money issue. There are no quick generalizations. And the proof of the pudding is, hasn't changed because of the money.
Patriarch.
Folks, I'm not saying go be poor. I'm saying find a way to get rich. Find a way to get rich. Find a way to get wealthy. That's all I'm telling you. And in this country, you could do it. But you got to change your thinking. Stop listening to broke people. So my advice to you in the last 25 minutes, go start your own business. Okay? Don't quit your job. Okay? Do what you got to do. Get that paycheck. and then take that paycheck and fund your own business. America wants you to be an entrepreneur. We're getting our butts kicked right now by China. Because why? We have no entrepreneurs. Schools have beat up entrepreneurs. Schools have talked down about entrepreneurship. School teachers are telling kids, go to school, get an education, get a good job. But you can't get a good job if there's no job. You be telling kids, go to school, get an education, start your own business. Whatever happened to that? That's what made this country great. Somehow we got off track. So do what you need to do. You're going to make it happen. I'm here to help you. You're not going to fail. You're not going to fail. I will not let you fail. I'll see you at the top because the bottom is too crowded, baby. It's too crowded. Let's go. We can make this happen. Our family is dependent on us. Our country needs us. The next generation needs us to win. Go freaking win. And stop following me on Facebook if you ain't going to follow my directions. Go win. Stop making excuses about your skin color, your lack of education, your financial situation. Stop using God as an excuse. God has nothing to do with broke. He has nothing to do with struggling. He don't condone it. There's nowhere in the Bible where he says you have to be broke. See, folks, you can win. Go win. You could do this. Call me if you want to win. Facebook me if you want to win. We'll find a way to make it happen, okay? I love you, and I'll see you at the top. God bless you. Bye-bye.
There's a direct relationship between having the businesses and being in prison. Go find see how many Asians you can find in American prisons. You ain't gonna be in there. But 51% of your prisoners will be black because blacks don't have any businesses and industries. There's a direct link. Blacks won't practice group economics. Black won't practice group politics. If you don't practice, you're setting yourself up. I told that 5-story building, you're setting yourself to get wiped out. Understand the nature of race, which is economics. If you build the first floor, it's economic. Build your businesses and your industries. Control business and industry, and put that pools in your money, and hold that money, and practice group economics with it. Arab and Asian money bounces 12 to 13 times what it leaves. Jewish money bounces 18 times. Black folk got to learn how to practice group economics. Black Americans spend every penny they get outside their own community. Then you take the money and the wealth that you get from that first floor and go to the second floor. The second floor is politics. You then take that money on the first floor and you control your politics. Black folk must quit allowing people to tell them to go out and vote. Vote for what? Nobody's gonna do anything for black folk in politics. Politics is controlled by money, major corporations who got the money. That's what controls politics. If you have no money, you have no say-so, you have no benefits coming. So you take your money and you control, and you take your money from the first floor, you buy every politician on the second floor. And any politician you can't buy, you rent or lease them to get what you need. Then once you get the second floor under control with your politician, with your money, then you go to the third floor. The third floor then is the police department and the court system. You take your money from the first floor and your politics on the second floor, and you control the court system and the police departments. Then the fourth floor, then is media. You then take the money that you generate off the first floor from business and industries, and you go after radio stations, TV stations, newspapers, and cable systems, so that you can now inform and communicate with your own people. Right now, black folk own and control less than 35 thousandths of 1% of the media in the United States. Out of 12,000 radio stations, black folk own about 75, 80. That's all. You own no cable systems. You don't have a daily newspaper. You have nothing of importance. You got about one black TV station. So you can't communicate with your people, you can't inform your people, you can't do anything. You can have Rush Limbaugh and all the rest of the guys talking about racism all day long and bad-mouthing you, and O'Reilly's. They can call black folk all kind of names all day long. What are you gonna do? You can't respond. You can't communicate with your own people because you don't have an economic base. 51% of all the prisoners in the United States are black people. You know you only make up 12% of the population. That's no accident. It's because you don't control the economics and the politics. And they're gonna go after the weakest people they can get their hands on to incarcerate them. That's the black folk. And what are you going to do in response to them when they over incarcerate you? You're going to go out and have a march, a demonstration. We're gonna march. March for what? Who cares? March really never changed anything.
Hey, Bill, I'm here in Mississippi, the poorest state in America, which is also the most conservative state in our union.
Why is the poorest state the most conservative state?
What is this? Where are we?
We're in the state of Mississippi. I don't care for the government. They don't show me anything.
You get food stamps.
Yeah, but I think I deserve food stamps. I have no employment.
Back when I was growing up and when my parents were growing up and my grandparents were growing up, we didn't have all that and people still made it. And back then people pulled their own weight. They didn't sit around waiting for everyone else to take care of them.
So you don't care about the economy?
No, just take care of yourself. You put God back in the saddle, it'll all be okay.
So something's not working here.
That's
Voting
right.
Republican hasn't worked for you.
But it could.
But it hasn't.
It hasn't, but it could.